Before we get into the stories, make sure you check out Donovan Dread Discovers, where I go over strange and weird videos from around the world. I release several times a week. Also, sign up for the weekly email at dreadsarmy.com so you don't miss any updates. A few years back, I was working as a forestry technician in West Virginia. My days were spent in the woods, monitoring tree health and whatnot. One evening in the fall, I was wrapping up some field work. As I was heading back to my truck, this eerie, high-pitched sound filled the air. It wasn't like anything I'd heard before. Curiosity tugging at me, I followed the sound until I reached a clearing. That's when I saw it. This thing was perched on a tree branch. It had a humanoid shape but was covered in dark leathery skin. The wings, man, they were huge, like something out of a horror movie. And its eyes, they were red and seemed to glow. We stared at each other, and I felt like I couldn't move. Then, in a whoosh, it spread its wings and shot up into the sky. The force of it nearly knocked me over. I hightailed it back to my truck, my heart pounding like a drum. The next day at work, I decided to report what I saw to my supervisor. I trusted him. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy. I told him the whole story, expecting him to take me seriously. But instead, he laughed. He said it was probably a big owl or a hawk, and my mind was playing tricks on me in the dim light. I insisted on what I saw, but he waved me off, telling me to lay off the scary movies. I couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I asked around, discreetly, to see if any other forestry workers had seen anything similar. Most hadn't, but old Bill, a guy who'd been working there for decades, told me in hushed tones that he'd seen something similar years ago. He never reported it, said no one would believe him. I felt frustrated and isolated. I knew what I saw, but it felt like no one wanted to hear it. I started to dread going into the woods, always feeling like something was watching me. One evening, a couple of weeks after the incident, I was at the local diner trying to unwind with a cup of coffee. That's when I overheard a couple of hikers at the next table talking about strange sounds they'd heard in the woods. My ears perked up, and I couldn't help but approach them. I introduced myself and cautiously shared my story. To my surprise, they didn't laugh or brush me off. They looked genuinely concerned and shared that they'd heard similar stories from other hikers. We decided to form a small group to see if we could find any evidence of what was out there. We met up on weekends, talking to locals and taking short, cautious trips into the woods. One of the group members, Sarah, managed to get in touch with a local historian. He told us that there were old legends about a creature that was said to guard the forest, a being that could fly and had eyes that glowed like fire. As the weeks went by, our group grew closer. We were all bound by this shared experience and the need to find answers. We started calling ourselves the Guardians of the Woods, half jokingly. One night, as we were camping near the clearing where I first saw the creature, we heard the high-pitched sound again. My heart raced as we all grabbed our flashlights and cameras. We didn't see the creature that night, but we found something. A feather, but it was unlike any bird feather I'd ever seen. It was large, black, and had an iridescent sheen that shimmered under the light. We decided to send it to a local university for analysis. Weeks later, we got a response that it didn't match any known bird species. Though we never saw the creature again, that feather was proof enough for me that something unexplained was out there. I eventually moved away, but I kept in touch with the group. We all went on with our lives, but that experience changed us. It opened our eyes to the mysteries that surround us. I don't know if I'll ever find out what that creature was, but I've made peace with that. So there I was on Little Back Road in the heart of the Allegheny National Forest in northwestern Pennsylvania, an area known for its wild, thick forest and rugged terrain. It was here that I had my encounter with something unusual. My name is Doe, and at the time I was a road crew member for PennDOT, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. Most of my job involved clearing debris off roads, patching up potholes, and the like. It's not glamorous work, but it keeps me active, and I've always liked working outdoors. But I'm not here to talk about my job. I'm here to share an incident that stuck with me, making me question what exactly roams the wilderness when we aren't looking. That day started like any other. A group of us were dispatched to clear some fallen trees and debris from a recent storm off a remote road cutting through the Allegheny National Forest. It was a muggy summer day, and the humidity made our high-visibility shirts stick to our bodies uncomfortably. As we were hacking away at a particularly large fallen oak tree, I noticed a peculiar footprint in the mud near the tree's base. It was big, bigger than any footprint I had ever seen. The shape was unusual too, not quite bear-like but not human either. It had 5 long toes with what looked like claw marks at the ends. There was an odd elongation to the footpad, almost primate-like, but it was the size that unnerved me. At first, I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was a misshapen bear track, distorted by the wet ground. But then I saw the path it made through the underbrush with the same odd prints, one after another leading deeper into the forest. I shook off the curiosity and got back to work, but the image of the footprint lingered in my mind. It wasn't until we were wrapping up, the sun hanging low in the sky, that I had my encounter. I was gathering up some tools from the edge of the road when I heard a sound in the bushes. I turned towards the noise. What I saw wasn't anything that I was expecting. It was tall, about 7 feet, standing on 2 legs with a slightly hunched posture. Its body was covered with fur that was dull and faded into the surroundings. It had huge arms, ending in hands with long human-like fingers. But it was the creature's face that really shook me. The face was unsettlingly human-like, with a broad, flat nose and pronounced brow ridge. But its eyes were wild and animalistic, darting everywhere. The creature didn't make any sounds, didn't move, it just stood there, staring at me, its chest heaving with each breath it took. The silence between us was so intense that I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I yelled at it. I have no idea why loud noises leapt out of my mouth. The thing barely reacted. It looked at me with barely any concern, and then it slowly turned and loped off into the forest. My voice then went numb, and nothing came out of my mouth. I stood there a bit, and by the time I found my voice, the creature was long gone. I reported the incident to my supervisor, describing what I saw in detail, but was met with skepticism. I was told it was likely a deer, distorted by the low light in my imagination. But I know what I saw, and it wasn't any deer. It wasn't even a bear, for that matter. I still work for Pendant, but I transferred to a more urban location, not long after the encounter. I just couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched every time I was out in the forest. Now, I spend my off hours researching what it might have been, poring over accounts of Bigfoot sightings and other cryptozoological phenomena. It keeps me up at night, but I can't stop. I need to know what I saw. I still love the outdoors, but I find myself hesitating now before venturing into the wild. There's an uneasiness, a sense of caution that I never had before. Every rustle in the bushes, every snap of a twig sends my heart racing. I'm hoping that one day that all goes away and I can enjoy the forest the way I used to. I don't know what I encountered that day in the Allegheny National Forest, and part of me isn't sure I want to. But what I do know is that something is out there, something unknown, something that's made me question everything I thought I knew about the natural world. So there it is, my encounter, a tale not spun with extravagant words or dramatic flourish, just a simple account of an ordinary man who came face to face with the extraordinary. I just hope that sharing my experience might shed some light on what lurks in the wild. I really think it's important that people know the truth. We were living in this beautiful, peaceful little neighborhood in Idaho. It was a pretty quiet place. All the houses looked the same, the streets were clean and maintained, and we loved our neighbors. I'd been living there for a few years with my spouse. I'm a mechanic, and I owned a shop in town that did pretty well. We really loved our house. The open layout was what originally attracted us to it, and even though it was a modern cookie-cutter house, it sort of had a vintage cabin vibe to it. It had a lot of character, and some of my favorite memories are from when we lived in that house. One evening, we were up late watching TV and chatting when our doorbell rang. It was very late, and it kind of freaked me out a bit. I grabbed my gun just in case and went to the door, but when I checked, nobody was there. I got pissed off and thought it was some punk kids who were pulling some annoying prank. But then it happened again and again, always around the same time at night. One night, I peeked from the window around the time the doorbell would normally ring, and I saw a young boy and girl standing on the porch. They were dressed in weird, vintage-like, old-time clothing and just staring at the door. I stood there for a while looking at them, waiting for them to ring the doorbell or do anything. But they just stood there, not moving at all. I opened the door and asked what they were doing, and they didn't say anything. They just kept standing there staring straight ahead. It was really bizarre to say the least. At first, I thought what I saw was just an illusion because it was so dark outside, but I could swear the children's eyes were completely black. Like there was no white at all, just black. It was super creepy. I was just about to command them to get the hell out of there when the girl asked if they could use our phone to call their mom. Her voice of monotonous, expressionless, and lifeless. It was hard to listen to. It really gave me the creeps, but they're children, so I figured I needed to help them out. I let them in, and as they walked into our house, their shoes barely made any sound at all. It was like they were trying not to make any sounds, but it was really creepy and you could cut the tension with a knife. My spouse was trying to be nice by trying to make small talk, but they were unresponsive and just wanted the phone. I handed the girl our home phone, and she looked at it like it was some relic from a bygone era. The boy remained silent, just staring into nothing. It was like they were in their own world, ignoring everything around them. The girl dialed a number on the phone, and as she talked, her voice remained flat, emotionless. I couldn't make out what she was saying. Her voice was barely a whisper. It took a few minutes, then she hung up, handed me the phone back, and with a curt thank you, they both turned and left our house. Even after they'd gone, I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling. My spouse felt the same. We tried to laugh it off, saying how it was probably a prank, but deep down, we were pretty shaken up. I double-checked all the locks that night, and for the first time in a long time, I kept my gun by the bedside. I was constantly on the lookout for those kids, but I never saw them again. Things were different after that. Everything was different. I'm convinced those kids cursed me and my family. My spouse and I, who used to get along really well, started having bitter fights. It wasn't just simple arguments or disagreements. It was full-blown screaming matches that lasted for hours, leading to sleepless nights and weary days. It was as if an unseen force had driven a wedge between us. Despite trying to talk things through, the fights only got worse until, eventually, we couldn't take it anymore and decided to part ways. The divorce left me in a state of turmoil, battling feelings of failure and isolation. I slipped into depression. It was a dark, bottomless pit that sucked away all the joy from my life. The mere act of getting out of bed in the morning felt like a huge task. I felt like I was drowning and no one could save me. I sought help, saw a psychiatrist who put me on a heavy dose of medication. The pills dulled the pain, made the world seem a little less bleak, but it was just a temporary fix. The sense of dread, of being cursed, never really left me. Meanwhile, things went south within my family too. My brother got diagnosed with a rare condition. One the doctor said he had a 1 in a million chance of contracting. My mother, once the most energetic person I knew, was now constantly fatigued and unwell. It was as if our family was under some ominous shadow, afflicted by a string of bizarre health conditions. Everything that happened, everything that went wrong, it all started after those black-eyed children showed up at our door. It's hard to explain, but I could feel it deep in my bones that we had been cursed. I'm writing this to make an inquiry about the disappearance of a French student known as Michelle. I know this sounds odd, as today is 2020, One, but Michelle was last seen hiking in the Six Rivers Forest here in California back in 1996. I think I have a lead, albeit very unusual. I am 22 years old, and I was hiking in the Six Rivers Forest a few weeks back with my girlfriend. We are both seasoned hikers, and we're so used to seeing strange creatures, strange flowers, and growths. But we encountered something that, to us, looked dangerous. Something dreadful and unusual that had the potential to kill. There was an open grassland area in which we were walking. The path was steep and mucky, so it was becoming quite strenuous for us both. What was odd was that it was early, around 11 a.m., but the sky was becoming sort of a dark orange hue, as if it were early evening. When we looked around, there were no other hikers, which was also odd, but we shrugged off our concerns, continuing on our path. As we got deeper into the path, we came to the peak of the mountain where we could overlook a sort of valley with overgrown foliage and densely packed wooded areas. My girlfriend shouted, "Look!" and my eyes swept down to see something moving in the valley, something that I initially thought was just a hallucination. It was a creature such as one I'd never seen before. It was made up of trees and branches and foliage, but it was in the shape of a large deer. It was green and appeared to be decorated. The branches throughout its body, too, were decorated in various patterns, kind of giving it a sense of structure. As I had good eyesight, I could make it all out clearly and could see even its face had tiny eyes. And its antlers, too, were made of branches and wood. I would have thought it was a design of some sort or some piece of art, but it was moving and walking around like a real living animal. It lowered its face to the ground, seemingly for food, and every so often it would look up and shake its head and look around. When we took out our cameras, our phones were both paused and totally unresponsive. It was so frustrating as we had obviously never seen such a thing before. It was walking around a small open area surrounded by woodland and a small pond. When I focused further and got a little closer, I could see that around the area were several skeletons, fully formed and lying as if to mark a territory around this thing. At that moment, my blood turned cold, and I felt the danger around us. I grabbed my girlfriend and pulled her next to me. After that, we walked carefully back up the path to the north and back to the peak where we originally descended. From there, we made our way back to the car. The whole time I was walking back, I felt like I had crossed some boundary, some marking of the land that was designed to keep people out. I was also thinking of that missing girl Michelle a lot, and couldn't help but think about the people who had gone missing in the forest. They couldn't have possibly been harmed by the strange creature, could they? I figured that even the park rangers, in their infinite wisdom of nature, would know of this creature, and that it being connected to human disappearances is not beyond the realm of possibility. Also, they realize the fact that things do exist within the universe that most people have not quite grasped. Therefore, I'm contacting the rangers in hopes they can help me search the area, preferably with a team and a chopper. I can give them exact coordinates on the map where we encountered this thing. We owe it to the people who enjoy the forest, for our children and their children, for Michelle and her family. As I sit down to recount the inexplicable events that transpired that evening, I am reminded of the unsettling feeling that has lingered within me ever since. My name is John Reynolds, a middle-aged man residing in Topeka, Kansas. An ordinary man leading an ordinary life. I never anticipated becoming entangled in a bewildering encounter with the unknown. It was a crisp autumn night in September, just a few years ago when the incident occurred. I had decided to take a break from the monotony of everyday life and embark on a solo camping trip in the picturesque Flint Hills. Seeking solace amidst nature, I had chosen a secluded spot near Clinton State Park, a location known for its breathtaking views and tranquility. As the sun began to go down that night, I found myself captivated by the serene beauty of the area. Little did I know that my serene retreat was about to be disrupted in the most unimaginable way. It was around 10 p.m. when I noticed a strange glow coming from the skies. Initially dismissing it as a satellite or a passing aircraft, I couldn't help but be intrigued by the unusual brightness and its erratic movement patterns. As I observed with growing astonishment, the glow began to transform into a discernible object, unmistakably revealing itself as a UFO. The craft defied conventional aerodynamic principles, showcasing a metallic sheen that flickered with an otherworldly luminescence. It moved with remarkable agility, darting across the night sky in a series of intricate maneuvers, defying the laws of physics as we, or at least I, know them. My heart raced, and a mixture of excitement, awe, and trepidation came over me. As the UFO hovered above, a silence descended upon the surroundings. The air seemed charged with an electric energy, tingling my senses. Suddenly, a bright beam of light emitted from the underside of the craft, sweeping across the ground below. Its luminescence revealed intricate details of the terrain, illuminating the trees, grass, and the nearby lake with an ethereal glow. And then, the moment that will forever be etched in my memory occurred. From within the UFO emerged a being, its appearance shocking. Standing at approximately 7 feet tall, its body possessed an otherworldly look. Its skin, if it could be called that, was a pale luminescent shade, shimmering softly in the moonlight. The being had elongated limbs, which moved with an almost fluidic elegance. Its head was disproportionately large compared to its body, with large almond-shaped eyes that shone oddly. There were no discernible facial features, save for a narrow slit where its mouth should have been. It moved effortlessly, its steps almost gliding across the ground, as if defying gravity itself. Time seemed to stand still as our eyes met, and in that brief moment, a profound sense of connection washed over me. I cannot explain it, but it felt as though this enigmatic being was peering into the depths of my soul, seeking something beyond mere understanding. As abruptly as it had arrived, the UFO shot up into the sky, disappearing into the vastness above, leaving bewildered. My mind swirled with emotions, fascination, curiosity, and a hint of fear. I was left questioning our existence, confronted with the realization that we are but small beings in a vast universe that is filled with enigmas yet to be learned. Upon my return to civilization, I shared my encounter with my brother Mark, who had always been open-minded about such phenomena. As I relayed the events of the night, Mark listened intently. While he could not fully grasp the profound impact of my experience, Mark offered his support and encouraged me to share my story with others to try and see if I was the only one. However, he also cautioned me about the skepticism and potential ridicule I might encounter, urging me to approach with caution. In the days that followed, I grappled with the encounter. I found solace in finding and connecting with other individuals who had experienced similar encounters, seeking a community where my story would be met with understanding rather than skepticism. These interactions helped validate my experience and provided a sense of comfort. As time passed, the encounter continued to shape my perspective on life. It also ignited an insatiable curiosity, leading me to delve deeper into the realms of UFOs, ancient civilizations, and the cosmic wonders that lie beyond our planet's borders. Now, as I conclude my account of that night, I do so with the hope that my story will reach those who have shared similar encounters. For it is only through sharing and embracing our experiences that we can strive towards unraveling the mysteries that have captivated humanity for centuries. I work in a specialized branch of government, not the kind that gets much public attention, but nonetheless important. I worked in a department dedicated to keeping track of potentially unexplained phenomena in national parks. My job was primarily desk-bound, tucked away in a corner of an office filled with white noise and the gentle hum of old computers. My work wasn't what you'd call thrilling. It involved sifting through incident reports, identifying patterns, and sometimes cross-referencing them with historical data. But over time, I started noticing a unique pattern. Incidents that couldn't be categorized easily. Incidents that kept me awake late into the night poring over maps and files. Incidents involving a certain creature. One incident stands out in particular. It started off as a routine report from a park ranger at one of our major parks. They had come across signs of an unusually large animal and some possible damage to trees and rocks in a remote area of the park. A few weeks later, a box of documents surfaced in our department, unclaimed and with no sender's address. The contents were immediately intriguing. Included were reports from park rangers, wildlife trackers, and even a couple of hunters. The documents spanned over 2 decades, but all seemed to describe encounters with the same type of creature. The unmarked box was nothing extraordinary, just a standard shipping carton. Yet, what lay inside was a labyrinth of accounts, some typed out on old typewriter paper, others hastily written in shaky handwriting. The dates varied, the oldest document dating back to the mid-80s. What stood out was the meticulous documentation detailed sketches, longitude and latitude coordinates, and even bits and pieces of what appeared to be fur or hair samples taped onto some pages. The box seemed to contain a lifetime's worth of observations and data on this singular mysterious creature. As I started cross-referencing the sightings and notes, a few details began to repeat across the board. Reports described a creature standing between 7 to 9 feet tall. It had a body that would put even a professional bodybuilder to shame, with wide shoulders and a broad chest. There were some discrepancies in descriptions of the creature's legs, with some stating they resembled a dog's while others argued they looked uncannily human. Its face seemed to be a grotesque amalgamation of features. The creature reportedly bore a broad snout akin to a German shepherd, with a double row of teeth that could be spotted when it growled or snarled. One particularly vivid account likened its facial structure to a demonic-looking hyena. The creature seemed to dwell in areas that are dense and remote, places where foot traffic is rare. Sightings were spread across multiple national parks, spanning from dense woodlands in the Pacific Northwest to the arid, hilly regions of the Southwest. The document suggested that it preferred the cover of the forest, but it wasn't shy of rocky terrain either. Apart from visuals, other details in the documents gave insights about its olfactory presence. People who came across the creature described an overpowering smell, a horrid combination of a wet dog, rotting meat, and something sulfuric. The smell of the creature seemed to be another common thread across the reports. People described it as something between a wet dog that had just come in from the rain and the overpowering stench of rotting meat left out in the sun for days. But the most curious description was the hint of sulfur, a smell more commonly associated with volcanic areas. One park ranger mentioned that the smell lingered long after the creature had apparently passed through the area. This unique combination of odors was like a signature, a calling card left behind at the scene, further cementing the identity of this unknown creature. As for the sounds, several accounts mentioned a deep guttural growl, almost akin to a low rumble, while others noted a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the wilderness, sounding nothing like typical wildlife calls. I know this might sound outlandish, but the consistency and sheer number of reports across different timelines and locations lead me to believe there's more to these accounts than just folklore or hallucinations. After completing a thorough investigation of the contents of the box, I felt compelled to do something more. I could no longer sit back and dismiss these as mere campfire stories or figments of overactive imaginations. The overwhelming consistency and vivid detail across the accounts suggested that this was something that required serious attention. I decided to take matters into my own hands and reached out to some trusted colleagues in my former department. Though met with initial skepticism, the evidence I shared gradually sparked interest. We formed a small team, a sort of unofficial task force, and started planning expeditions to investigate these reports further. Our first trip took us to the Pacific Northwest, where a cluster of recent sightings had been documented, Armed with maps, the detailed accounts from the box, and a sense of uneasy anticipation, we set off into the dense forest. It's been a year since that first expedition. We've had our share of unexplained phenomena, eerie sounds in the darkness, and traces of an inexplicably large creature. Though we haven't come face to face with the creature yet, we've collected enough evidence to believe we're on the right path. This journey has taken us to the edges of reason and scientific understanding. It's become more than just an investigation. It's a quest for truth, to understand what lurks in the shadows of our wild spaces. We're taking every precaution, realizing that this creature, whatever it may be, is better adapted to this environment than we are. We're not sure what lies ahead, but the pursuit of truth drives us forward. If there is something out there, we are determined to find it, to understand it, and hopefully to coexist with it. Until then, the creature from the box remains an enigma, a shadow in the wilderness that continues to captivate and terrify us. I'm an avid hiker, and I used to do a lot of hiking alone. I don't as much anymore, especially after the encounter I had. It actually has changed my behavior a lot. I'm much more careful now. And actually, I now carry a gun. Guns are kind of a disputed thing in the hiking community. Some people say that if you're smart and follow the guidelines, you'll never need one. Others say that it doesn't hurt. And others say that you should always have one because bears and mountain lions don't care about the guidelines. I've always carried bear spray as a precaution, but a gun is a whole different level. You see, that's the thing about life. You could live your whole life thinking and believing one thing. Like, I don't need a gun while hiking, and then something crazy happens and your whole perspective changes. Now, my perspective is I need a gun anytime I go into the woods. I suppose that my perspective on life has changed in more ways than just that as a result of this encounter. I went my whole life thinking there is nothing weird in the woods, and now I believe there is definitely something weird in the woods. I live in Northern California. When people think of California, they think of surfing and the Pacific Oceans and liberal politics. Where I come from, we don't fit that stereotype. There are no surfer dudes giving you a hang loose and voting blue. Northern California is very mountainous and fairly remote. People here are old-fashioned, and we like the traditional way of living. Now, I'm fairly young, so I have some issues with the traditional way of living. But I think there is some legitimate wisdom in a lot of it. It was my grandpa that first brought me out into the woods and made me fall in love with it. Now that I think about it, he always carried a gun. Because things are so traditional out here. There are a lot of stories. People haven't forgotten about that footage that was on the news in the 70s. The town I live in, Grayling, is pretty far from where that footage was shot, but people talk about it nonetheless, like it happened right in their backyard. I always thought they were just stories that people told for fun. Just stories for hanging out around the fire or in the woods. Just stories to teach little kids to be careful in the woods and at night. My encounter began like any other hiking trip. It had been a long work week, so I just wanted to get out into the woods and unwind a little. Lose cell service to gain perspective, as those dumb tourist t-shirts say. My plan was to drive a few hours out to a nearby canyon, hike out a few miles, and then pitch a tent. I was by myself and planned to just spend some time by myself, thinking and relaxing. The canyon is called Big Pine Canyon because it's relatively wide and has a flat forested floor. It's a great camping spot, but not well known. The locals have managed to keep it a secret, so there are basically no tourists that know about it. I parked the truck and hiked out, and it was relatively uneventful. I took my time enjoying the remoteness of the valley. I didn't see a single other person, and there were no other cars in the trailhead lot. I pitched my camp, made a fire, and went to bed. It was peaceful and eventful. Until the next day, which had enough eventfulness for a lifetime. From the second I woke up, things were anything but peaceful. That's because I woke up to a knocking sound, like something was hitting a tree trunk with a big stick. Normally I'd write this off as random forest noise. Weird things happen in the woods and they come with weird noises. Some degree of weird noises is normal, but this knocking was consistent. happening every few minutes. It was also rhythmic, making it seem very, very intentional. It wasn't just a branch breaking and it was too loud to be a woodpecker. The knocking alone was honestly quite eerie. It would last for a few seconds and stop, and then it would pick up again a few minutes later and stop. I started to pack up my 10 sleeping bag. I didn't know what was out there, but I knew I didn't think I wanted to encounter it. I was on the trail back and the knocking didn't stop. It actually seemed like it was following me. I was hiking as fast as I could, basically running, and something was in pursuit of me, making sure that I knew that it was following me because it kept on knocking. I kept checking the trail behind me, trying to see what was making the sound. Towards the end of the trail, you come out of the woods and into a wide plain full of native grasses. From this point, it's only about a mile to the trailhead. I broke through the tree line and was in this grassy, flat area when I finally caught a glimpse of it. I was checking over my shoulder again when I saw a big shadow just inside the tree line. It was huge, probably 9 feet tall. It was in the shape of a man standing on 2 legs, but it was far too big to be a man. It had a long, thick branch in its right hand. I watched as it held it above its head and started banging against the tree branches above its head. When it started knocking, I started sprinting for the car. Up until this point, I had just been hiking fast. Now I was running in my heavy hiking boots, trying not to trip on the uneven dirt trail. I didn't check over my shoulder as I ran, but I could hear it knocking, warning me to get out of its valley. I have not gone back to Big Pine Canyon since then. Something else lives there, and obviously I was trespassing. It gave me a warning to get out. I'm not going to test its patience. I am writing this journal entry in response to the strange events of the last couple of nights. I am not sure what I have seen these past few nights, but they are extraordinary nonetheless. 3 weeks ago, I decided to make a solo backpacking trip into the heart of the Adirondack wilderness. I stayed away from the trails because I wanted to get more in touch with nature. It was supposed to be a healing journey, which my therapist said I should do. Boy, I bet he won't believe what I will tell them our next session. He will probably give me a one-way ticket to the mental health ward. However, I know what I saw, and it wasn't of this earth. I planned to backpack into the wilderness of the High Peaks region. I waited until after the close of deer season to avoid any hunters potentially mistaking me for a deer. After all, it has been known to happen. Since the season ends around the second week of December, I knew I needed to be prepared for the cold winter and snow. I would bring along a sled to help bring in all my supplies, such as a hot tent, stove, and other supplies. I parked at a public parking lot with a note indicating where I would be in case of an emergency. From there, I made the arduous journey into the heart of the wilderness. Progress was slowed by downed trees that seemed to grab at my sled at every turn. However, I strove onward. I stopped a couple of hours before nightfall to set up camp and cut some firewood for the night. I knew I wanted to get further in so I could relax. The first night was relatively uneventful. I made a cup of hot chocolate while I stared at the clear sky. The beautiful aspect of the wilderness is you don't have to deal with light pollution. You get to see all of the stars in their glory. Now and then, you see planes in the sky, but for the most part, the night sky is unmolested by man. At one point, I saw a blip of a light zoom quickly across the sky. I figured it was a satellite or some comet. Eventually, the cold night forced me into the warm tent, and from there I drifted off to sleep. The next day I moved deeper into the wilderness. An uneventful day as I slowly made my way deeper into the woods. Once I found a suitable location to camp at for the next few days, I quickly went to work getting everything ready. Within 2 hours, I had enough wood to last a few days. Then I began to relax as the sun started to set finally. Again, I enjoyed a cup of hot chocolate as I enjoyed the view of the night sky. After about a half hour, something seemed weird. I noticed a light that I assumed was a jet or plane. It seemed normal at first, but then it changed direction every few seconds. Then it came to a complete stop in midair before going in reverse. This was incredibly odd because I knew that this was no ordinary plane. Maybe it was some sort of new prototype tested by the Air Force. Either way, I felt uncomfortable for some reason. This lasted for about 10 minutes. Afterward, I went to bed, which was the end of that night. The third day was freezing, so I stayed in camp most of the day. I read a little bit here and there. Mostly, I kept the fire going in the stove and napped. I ate a late dinner and decided to call it an early night. Around midnight, I was awoken by a blinding light. I was so disoriented that I didn't know what to think. At first, I thought someone was shining a spotlight on my tent. Then I realized that the light was coming from above rather than from the ground. Then my mind began to race. My only explanation was a helicopter must have spotted me and decided to use me as a practice dummy. When I unzipped the tent to look outside, the light was instantly gone, and it was completely quiet. There should have been the sound of a helicopter at least flying away, but there wasn't anything. I became scared and immediately grabbed my hatchet. I couldn't sleep at all the rest of the night. There was something odd about the light as well. It seemed to pulse with different hues of light now that I reflect on what happened. It almost seemed alive, but that didn't make any sense. I decided that I would start heading out at the first light. I knew I had another night of camping before I could make it out of here, but I wanted to put some distance between me and whatever I dealt with last night. I skipped lunch to get more miles in before I had to set up camp, and I hiked a good distance. I felt more at ease for the night knowing I had put a large distance in. I enjoyed my dinner before I headed to bed. I wanted to get up early to get out of the wilderness by noon. Around midnight, it happened again. I was awoken again by a blinding light, but it seemed more intense this time, as if it was closer. I heard a metallic hum that grew louder as the light beam intensified. I was so scared by what was happening, I didn't even worry about my boots as I quickly unzipped the tent. What I saw next left me dumbfounded. Maybe 100 feet above me was a circular object that emitted light in its center. Other lights emitted from the sides danced across the surrounding area and constantly changed colors. The light in the center went out second after I was outside the tent. There appeared to be a glass window from which I could see the silhouette of two people. Except I don't know if they were people. They were tall and skinny, but there was something about the shape of their heads. They looked long and cylindrical. I knew that image would stay with me forever. The whole thing only lasted about 2 minutes. Once I saw the pilots, the object they were in began to ascend quickly. Within a few seconds, it had disappeared into the night sky. I quickly packed up camp and followed my previous trail out of the woods in the dark. I arrived in the parking lot exhausted and freaked out still. I didn't waste time getting home, speeding most of the way. I'm afraid this isn't the last I will see of that aircraft, which scares me the most. My name is James, and I'm from Maine. I was in the remote wilderness of Alaska, chasing the elusive northern lights for a work project. I'd been in the wild many times, but this particular night in February was different. Originally, I'm a city boy from Boston. Growing up, I was surrounded by concrete and skyscrapers, and my only exposure to nature was through books and the occasional school trip to the zoo. It was during one such visit, while watching a nature documentary in the zoo's theater, that I was first captivated by the wild. Intrigued by the vast landscapes and the mesmerizing fauna, I started taking pictures with my old film camera, capturing the pigeons and squirrels of city parks. Over time, the local critters weren't enough for me, so after high school, I decided to major in wildlife biology, hoping it would give me the opportunity to venture into the wild. Upon graduation, I landed a job as a wildlife photographer with a renowned magazine. I traveled to rainforests, savannas, and coral reefs, capturing the beauty of the world through my lens. I've always had an affinity for the harsh but stunning landscapes of the colder regions, so when the chance to photograph the northern lights presented itself, I grabbed it eagerly. I'd spent the evening setting up my gear for the perfect shot, when an overwhelming, repugnant smell hit me like rotting meat and wet dog. It was strange and out of place. Throughout my travels, I've experienced a whole range of different smells and sounds that the wilderness has to offer. There's the fresh, earthy scent of a rainforest after a heavy downpour, the salty aroma of the ocean breeze on a coastal cliff. I've come across carcasses in the wild, remnants of a predator's meal or the unfortunate result of an illness or accident. The smell of decay is potent and unappealing, but this was different. It was more complex, layered with an undertone of wet dog and something vaguely sulfuric. And the sounds. The growl that night was unlike anything. It wasn't just the sound, but the sense of intent behind it. A clear, deliberate announcement of presence. I remember the shock of it, the way the growl seemed to echo around me, reverberating off the trees. My heart was hammering in my chest, the unexpected sound jolting me into a heightened state of alertness. In the wilderness, you quickly learn that out-of-place noises could signal danger. I've had run-ins with grizzlies and mountain lions, encounters that taught me the importance of respecting the wild and its inhabitants. But this was different. That's when I saw it standing at the edge of the tree line. It was roughly 8 feet tall, standing upright with wide shoulders and a large chest. It had a long snout, pointy ears, and a double row of teeth that were visible even from my distance. Its fur was a dark muddy brown. Despite its body resembling a dog's, its legs were eerily human-like. It was the eyes that held my attention the most, though. They were glowing ominously in the light of my flashlight. I remember my initial reaction was one of disbelief. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, certain that the freezing cold was playing tricks on me. But the image remained, the creature was real. Thoughts flooded my mind as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. Could it be some kind of undiscovered species? Was I witnessing a rare genetic anomaly? Could it be a figment of my own fear and imagination, brought on by the eerie night and my isolation? The sense of dread was overwhelming. But as a photographer, my instincts kicked in. I reached for my camera. It was a complex mix of fear, curiosity, and professional determination. I remember fumbling for my camera, hands trembling from the cold. My mind was filled with questions. What was this creature? How did it come to be? Would anyone even believe me if I told them about it? I pushed my fear to the background. Framing the shot, adjusting the exposure, focusing the lens, it was almost automatic. A familiar routine amidst the unfamiliar. Despite the overwhelming fear and the uncanny nature of the encounter, I couldn't resist the urge to document the creature. As I started clicking, the creature let out a guttural howl and disappeared into the trees. I could hear the rustling of branches as it moved away. Afterwards, I packed up and made a hasty retreat back to my camp. I spent the rest of the trip in a state of constant unease, and every noise in the night made my heart skip a beat. Since then, I've been wary on my trips, always watching over my shoulder. What I saw that night was something beyond ordinary, and it has changed the way I look at the wilderness forever. Supernatural sightings don't happen all at once. Sometimes it takes years for multiple stories to crop up in the same area. By then, that first story is either forgotten or criticized. It takes 2 stories to turn a bad night into something real. Suddenly, the tale of monsters in the woods becomes a little more believable. The first story needs the support of that second story to earn any merit of its own. My cousin had one of those stories. His story was the only one like it, which was unlucky for him. He told a tale of a summer day he went fishing on our local lake. The lake itself is unremarkable. It's a good size and it runs deep, but it's a lake. There aren't a lot of descriptors I could add to its appearance that you haven't already imagined. In my cousin's story, of course, the lake was remarkable. In fact, it was downright exceptional, but I'm getting ahead of myself. On this day, he was fishing out on that lake on his little boat just as he'd done every summer since he could cast a line. Only this time, he didn't catch anything. Quite the opposite, actually. Something caught him. He felt the boat lurch and stumble forward. He thought it was something pulling on his fishing rod. He tried to steady himself and gripped its handle like an iron vise. Only it wasn't the pole pulling him forward. It was the boat. Something was underneath the boat and had bumped it so hard that the vessel had jumped forward and completely disoriented my cousin. He leaned over to peer over the edge but could only catch a quick glimpse of a large gray shape disappearing into the depths. He stared a long time to see if it would come back up. It was bigger than any fish he'd ever heard of, and he said it was so much bigger that it could have cracked his boat in two if it tried. That story on its own didn't amount to much. You need two stories, remember? You need that second story so you can say I told you so. I'm sure you've experienced the same type of moment yourself. Someone comes back to you humbled to let you know that you were right about something. And now they want your advice even though it was once good for nothing. In this example, I was the one who wound up in that position. I didn't believe my cousin. Then I saw the shape for myself. I saw it break the water. I saw it climb taller than any fish has any right to be. Then I saw it crash back down and disappear into the lake. Unlike my cousin, I wasn't fishing at the time. I was reading. I like to go out near the shore, soak in the cool breeze, and burn through a few dozen pages of a book. The sound of the water breaking ruined that for me. I heard the surface of the lake break and my eyes jumped to the source. Someone else was out there, I thought. Someone had to be. What were the odds that I was the only person watching at that moment, with so many houses speckled around the lake? What I saw was a huge, scaly fish body. It jumped clean out of the water, catching a bird in its hands. That was the problem, right? I was looking at something my brain called a fish, but I could see human limbs as clear as day. I could see the torso of a man. I could see his fingers wrap around the bird's body. I even thought I saw him smile some wide-mouthed smile. Every animal is glad to catch its prey, right? I guess this thing was no different. The only issue was, from the waist down, the man I was looking at had a tail. It was long and thick, round like a tree trunk. Just like my cousin said, the thing was massive. It was long, and then it was gone as quickly as it had arrived. It made a huge splash. The water shimmered white with the impact, and then the bird and the thing from the lake disappeared. That made my story the second story. I was now the second person to get laughed at talking about the creature hiding in our lake. However, there was one person I was confident I could talk to, my cousin. But when I told him what I'd seen, he laughed too. You see, normally two stories with shared details validate little pieces of each other. They create a truth. But every once in a while, one of those stories is so outlandish that none of the details can even be considered to be true. I don't blame him for reacting that way. I just wish someone believed me. And I wish they'd stop going out onto that lake, because sooner or later, those scaled hands won't be reaching for feathered prey. You've been out on a lake, haven't you? You felt those phantom lurches beneath the water and chalked it up to a weird collision with the current or the wake. You've blamed the driver's skill or the unpredictability of the weather. But I've seen something in our waters. There could be something in your waters too. You might peer over the edge and only see the blur, or you might look down and see what I saw. You might see the man with the fishtail body. You might see the smile as wide as a catfish's mouth with teeth as sharp as nails. And then if you get to tell that story to someone, you'll be lucky if they laugh at you. I guess that's what I am, right? I'm lucky that I was only beside the lake instead of on top of it. Otherwise, I could have been the bird that day, and I would still think my cousin was a liar. I'm an F-16 pilot based at a military base in the southwestern part of the United States. And as you probably know, UAPs, otherwise known as unidentified aerial phenomena, aren't exactly a new thing. I mean, they used to be called UFOs, and before that, they were called something else. We've basically been trying to find a name for them since we as humans could talk. None of the acronyms really do them justice, do they? Maybe that's because each title brings on a very specific image. UAPs remind us of obscure lights like the orbs over Arizona in 1997. UFOs remind us of the classic green men in a flying saucer, but that doesn't cover every variable. Those two sides of the Venn diagram don't encompass everything that we've seen. The sky is home to almost as many phenomena as the sea, and almost as many creatures. That's the UAP that I encountered. That's the one we were asked to identify, to follow, and to eliminate. Saying it made us nervous would be an understatement. One of the planes was being tailed by an unidentified aircraft. It started over the skies of Nevada and followed the plane east. It registered on radar and the pilot caught glimpses of something massive, diving above and below the clouds. The pilot described it as too mobile to be any type of human craft. He couldn't make out the details through the density of the atmosphere, but he could tell that its movements were too agile to be man-made. There are protocols for that type of encounter. Believe it or not, they happen quite frequently. Most times, the danger posed by the mysterious craft quickly dissipates. We weren't that lucky this time. Then again, we weren't exactly dealing with an aircraft. Suddenly, the unidentified object increased its pace. It cut ahead of the plane and jumped below the clouds. For a split second, it was visible in its entirety to the pilot and to the recording instruments within the cockpit. The findings were unanimous. It wasn't an aircraft. It was alive. It was a creature of some kind, as large as a 747, structurally similar to an eagle except in the places where its feathers were missing and its leathery flesh was visible beneath. The turbulence caused by its erratic flight pattern was strong enough to throw the plane off course. They landed safely. That's when I was contacted. Myself and a group of pilots were sent up in F-16s to attempt a pursuit of the creature. We scoured the area, searched as thoroughly as we could, but returned to base empty-handed. All we had were the original readings and the pilot's description of what he saw. That was enough to keep us interested, especially as other reports trickled in from civilians. Fortunately, the creature was always too far away to be vividly captured on film. We used those reports to track its flight path. We spent months trying to predict its behavior so that when it turned up, we'd be waiting. Whether or not the creature had any cruel intentions at heart is obviously up for debate, but its existence was enough of a threat to our security that something had to be done. At the time, I wasn't the type to ask a lot of questions. I liked having orders. Orders made things easy. Of course, we didn't expect that the beast would come for us. We woke up to alarms. Training and adrenaline filled in the gaps where fear would have left us vulnerable. The base was fully alert and capable of violently defending itself within minutes. We were expecting an airstrike. We were watching the gray skies overhead waiting for the clouds to explode. Our anti-aircraft operators were screaming with chatter, unsure of whether or not to act on what they were seeing. It took the rest of us a moment to catch on. We didn't know what it was until it was on top of us. Even the few there who had actively been pursuing the creature didn't expect to see it like this. It descended through the clouds and blacked out the sky behind it. It seemed to spread its wings from horizon to horizon. It was easy to imagine the giant bird spreading its giant maw and plucking us all from the ground. The anti-aircraft missiles kept that from happening. Small explosions rippled against its body, sending shockwaves through its feathers and through the musculature below. It let out a screech that shattered every pane of glass on the base. Then it pulled upright and flew away. We wanted to run it down. Our own vehicles were suddenly inoperable. We were stuck there, with no choice but to watch it depart, knowing that our best defenses had only tickled the great creature. It had come down and warned us, we decided, and no one wanted to chase it anymore after that. We were scolded by our superiors. Of course we were. Blaming us was the only action they could take. We took our lashings and moved on. The incident at the base was described to the press as a routine drill. The papers ran whatever story they wanted to, most often suggesting that we had tested some top-secret weapon or vehicle. The sightings from around the base were easily explained away as weather phenomena. The creature was so big already that it was easy to imagine it was only a cloud, painted alive by just the right balance of wind and moonlight. Before we could resume the hunt, we were relieved to learn that the beast had been brought down by someone else. An international ally had spotted it over the ocean and sent the beast to the depths below. That was a better place for it than the dirt of the American Southwest. And now we have new protocols. There are new words in our lexicon and new orders that get issued when a UAP exhibits specific patterns. When it's alive, for instance, we don't pursue. We can't risk inviting something like the bird back to our military bases. When it's alive, we run and get as far away as possible. It didn't take us long to realize that we are no match for that creature. So for now, our officially unofficial orders are to run for the hills. I was an officer for the Minneapolis Police Department. This happened in the summer of 2007, and it is, without a doubt, the strangest thing I've ever encountered in my entire life. It started with some odd reports. Strange sightings that most of my department was convinced that it was an elaborate joke. Towards the end of it, we just stopped taking down reports when we would get calls about it. The first call was from a college student. She was studying at a university in the area and claimed to have seen a creature on the roof of one of the buildings. The call came in on a Friday night, and when I heard the word creature, I assumed that someone was pulling a prank. She described a feathered birdman with glowing red eyes. I was on the phone with her at the station, and some of the other officers started listening in when I asked her to describe the creature. I asked what the birdman was doing, and it took every ounce of self-restraint I had to keep from laughing. She said the birdman was just standing there, staring at her. I asked if the birdman was doing anything illegal, and the girl hung up. In hindsight, I was definitely being a smartass, but how was I supposed to believe any of that? A birdman with glowing red eyes. I didn't think so. However, we got another call the next day. This time it was from a woman in her 40s, working the weekend shift at a mall department store. She closed up for the night and headed to her car in the parking lot, and there, standing under a lamppost, was the dark silhouette of a man with wings. And get this, he had glowing red eyes. I thought the other officers were pranking me. There was no way there was another call in about a menacing winged man. I told them nice try and went on with the rest of my day. But it didn't end there. Not by a long shot. Over the next 2 weeks, we had numerous calls about this creature. It was everywhere and nowhere all at once. Sometimes it was described as having red eyes, sometimes gold or amber. All the callers said it was about 5.5 to 6 feet tall and had wings. Not a single person saw its face. Sometimes it was on a roof, sometimes it was just standing on the ground in the shadows. No one ever saw it fly anywhere. After about the 6th call, I started to look into this as much as I could. There wasn't a whole lot to go on, and the whole thing became a joke in our department. There would be bets on if we would get a call about the creature that day. We had wondered if there was maybe some new hallucinogenic drug out there causing people to see this thing. The other theory floating around was that there was some guy dressing up as this creature and trying to scare people. That was the theory that made the most sense to me. But you'd think that with all the driving around we all do at night, one of us would have seen it by now. When I couldn't find any other information, I did a quick Google search and tried to find something that matched the descriptions. There, I did find something interesting. The Mothman. Now, I didn't really believe in all that stuff, but the sketches I saw of it were just like the descriptions we had been getting. I continued my search, trying to find some reason that these creatures were all of a sudden popping up when there had been no evidence of them here previously. I didn't find much, but I did read that sometimes they show up just before something bad is about to happen. I got a sinking feeling in my stomach. I'm not sure exactly why, because like I said, I don't believe in this stuff, but I couldn't shake the feeling. We continued to get in reports of this thing, but that was about it. It had never attacked anyone or shown signs of aggression. It was just there, and still, none of us had yet to see one. Of course, we would jokingly say we saw the Birdman at a traffic stop and things like that, but it was just such an absurd thing that it was impossible not to joke about. The reports came in by the dozens during the last week of July. The creature was in the road, it was on the roof of the bank, it was in an alleyway. There was just no end to it. The reports were so numerous that we were told to search for this thing on our patrols. My superiors were convinced that it was a person or a group of people playing an elaborate prank, which, to be fair, was a logical explanation. The following week, just after 6 p.m. on August 1st, the I-35 West Bridge over the Mississippi River collapsed. It was a sudden freak accident due to a fatal design flaw of the bridge. It was loaded with rush hour traffic at the time. It was bad. There were 13 total deaths, I believe, and about 150 injuries. I didn't put it together at the time, but after that, the sightings of the creature stopped altogether. I still can't say exactly what the creature was since I never saw it myself. I don't know if the thing was evil or it came as a warning. I don't think anyone really knows. I do know that if I ever hear a report of one again, I'm taking my family and leaving town immediately. It was 1997 and I was camping with my sister at Craig Lake State Park in northern Michigan, up on the UP. It was the middle of summer and unfortunately we're expecting a heat wave on the exact week of our trip. We had both taken off from work already, so we decided to go anyway and try to enjoy it. We planned to sleep in our hammocks and brought bug nets to hang above them. If you've never been to the Midwest, we have mosquitoes here that are just huge. We brought a tent too, as it looked like we might have a little rain in the middle of the week. But neither of us wanted to sleep in a tent when the nighttime temperature didn't look like it was going to get below 80. Our campsite was a hiking type of spot, but it was only about 4 miles from the parking lot. We were both sweating buckets by the time we hauled all our gear to the site, and I wondered if we would be able to survive the week or if we would roast alive. Most of the week went fine. Very hot and a little miserable, but we didn't run into anything strange. When I hear people tell stories like this, and there's almost always something they missed in hindsight, but here, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing at all. On the 5th day, it had begun to rain about halfway through the day. It started out as a little rain but got significantly worse as the day progressed. It was just starting to get bad as we returned from our morning hike, so we took down our hammocks and set up the tent. By dinner time, it was pouring. We obviously couldn't get a fire started, so we cooked dinner in the vestibule on a little portable stove. The tent had started leaking about an hour or so later, and then the wind picked up. There was a pool of water on the floor of our tent when we decided we'd rather hike the 4 miles back to the car. We figured we could probably find a hotel room in town, and if not, at least we would be dry in the car. The trail to the parking lot was well marked, and we should have easily found our way back. The rain and wind were making it hard to see, so when we thought we saw the red taillights of another car, we headed straight for it. It looked exactly like taillights, bright red and glowing in the distance. It looked maybe 60 or 70 feet away from where we were on the trail. The trail had gotten soupy from all the rain, and it became difficult to tell if we were on it or not. We tried to use the light as a guide to follow back to the parking lot, but we ended up stepping directly into a swamp. The sudden change in footing surprised us both, and we fell forward into the mud. It was that sticky type of mud that holds you in. I don't think it was quicksand, but it was difficult to get out of. When we had climbed back onto the trail, we sat there on the ground staring at this light that appeared to be dead center in this swamp. My sister was worried it was a car that had driven off the road, but it wasn't sinking and we didn't hear anyone screaming for help. I didn't know what it was, but something felt off about the whole situation. If it was a car, it's not like we would be able to help them anyway. We barely got ourselves out of the mud. We continued on in the direction we hoped was the parking lot. We decided we would call the police about the possible stuck car when we got back to ours. The rain got heavier, if that was even possible, and the strange red light faded into the distance. Not more than 10 minutes later, we saw another light. Red, about 3 feet off the ground. Looked just like the taillight of a car. This time it was in the middle of a forest. I recognized this area. We were almost to the parking lot, but this particular area was heavily wooded. No way would a car even fit between the trees in here. I said it can't be a car, that it must be a person with a red lantern or a red headlight. My sister called out to see if anyone needed help. No answer. My sister wanted to go in there and see what it was, but I definitely did not. But the longer I stared at the light, the more I wanted to investigate it too. I felt strange, watching it, almost like I was in a trance. And then the light moved. It dropped to the ground. It was maybe 1 foot off the ground now. It came towards us, slithering like a snake through the trees, moving back and forth but coming closer as it did so. It was very strange and also very much like a reptile. I had an overwhelming sense of dread. My sister and I didn't need to say anything, we just ran. I looked back to see the red light following us, but it stopped when it got to the edge of the trail. I never figured out what it was. My sister didn't have any explanation for it either. We did call the non-emergency police line when we got back to our car and reported a car possibly stuck in the swamp. But her and I both knew that whatever was out there wasn't taillights from a car. But at the same time, we wanted to say something that would get the police out there to investigate. We never did hear anything further about what they might have found. And to be honest, I'm happy with that. I'm happy not knowing the truth about what was attached to those slithering lights. I never thought I'd be one of the people that had a close encounter, but here I am, joining the ranks of the believers. Once you've seen something with your own eyes, it doesn't matter anymore what other people say. My name is Donna and I live in Watkins Glen in upstate New York, at the base of Seneca Lake. We have a lot of wilderness areas around here, and we see our share of black bears and deer, and even the occasional moose. I've lived here my whole life. This all started with my daughter, Amy, who's 7. She's our only child and she spends more time than she should indoors. When I was a kid, I remember my mom had a hard time getting me in through the door for supper. But I guess kids these days are different. Even though I restrict her screen time, she spends a lot of her afternoons just drawing pictures and coloring. I guess that's not so bad, but I think all children need to be outside, enjoying the fresh air, for at least a couple hours a day. There aren't any kids her age near our house, so that's part of the problem. Our closest neighbor is a half-mile away. I remember it was a Wednesday afternoon when it all started. My husband likes to have chicken on Wednesdays, so I was mixing up a marinade for the chicken when Amy came into the kitchen. She wanted a snack. It was a couple hours till dinner, so I gave her an apple. She whined a little. She'd wanted chips, but like I told her, you don't always get what you want. Amy had been coloring in the living room, but now she was getting bored and right on the verge of cranky. I told her to put on her sneakers and go outside to play for a while. Fresh air is the best cure for a youngster's crankiness, in my opinion. I watched her for a minute through the kitchen window. Our backyard ends at a deep stretch of woods, but Amy knows not to go in them. So far, she'd always followed the rules. Plus, what kid isn't afraid to be alone in the woods? I saw she'd taken her apple with her, and I almost went to the door to remind her to eat it all and not just throw it on the ground. She saw my husband do that once when he tried to see how far he could throw one, and you know how kids are, copying everything you do. I got busy preparing dinner then and didn't watch her too much. About 15 minutes later, Amy was back inside, heading for the fridge. I said, "Hey, now, what are you after?" And she told me she needed another apple. "What happened to the first one? Did you drop it?" I asked her. She said no. She gave it to the hairy man. I about dropped the potato I was peeling and asked, "What hairy man?" I was over to the window in a flash, but there wasn't anybody in the yard. Amy told me the hairy man didn't have a name, and that's when I figured she'd imagined it. Probably she'd dropped the apple and didn't want to say. I know some people will think I should have been more worried, but we aren't near the city or any neighbors, and Amy is given to imaginary friends. I just let it go, told her no more snacks, go wash her hands for dinner. She did and then came back to color some more. It wasn't until after she was in bed that night, and I was cleaning up her crayons and papers that I saw it. a drawing she'd made. I recognized the stick figure in a red shirt and blue shorts with braids as Amy, but the figure she'd drawn standing next to her was kind of a shock. It towered over her, all scribbled in brown crayon. It looked like an ape with a person's face. I showed it to my husband, but he just laughed and said, "That kid sure got an imagination." I put it out of my mind until the next day when Amy went missing. She'd been right there in the backyard, and I could see her through the window. The next minute, she was gone. I ran outside, calling her name, but she didn't answer, and I really started to get scared. I went into the woods behind the house and walked around, calling her and getting more panicked by the second, and then I heard her voice. I followed the sound, and all of a sudden I spotted her, standing in a clearing. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was this giant creature, about 6.5 feet tall, standing only 10 feet away from my little girl. It had animal fur all over it and a bumpy face like a caveman. Its arms were really long, its hands hung almost down to its knees, and its back seemed hunched. It stood on 2 legs, but not up straight, if you know what I mean. I swear it looked exactly like how people describe a Bigfoot monster. I screamed and ran forward. My baby was in danger. The thing turned and looked at me and made this sound like a loud grunt. Deep, but not really a growl. And then it just crashed through the woods away from Amy. Poor Amy was so panicked she fell on the ground and started to shake and cry. I ran over and scooped her up and ran back inside, checking her all over. No injuries, but I called the police and then my husband right away. I was totally hysterical. Unfortunately, that's how they treated me, like a hysterical woman. They didn't believe it was Bigfoot, of course. I mean, I could hardly believe it, and I saw it. They checked the woods and saw no sign of anyone. They asked Amy questions but didn't believe her when she told them about the hairy man who liked apples. My husband thinks it was a human, some sort of child predator. He was pretty worried, thinking Amy almost got kidnapped. He went out and bought a dog the next day to keep us alerted and safe. A German Shepherd. I know what I saw. It wasn't human. Even with the dog, I'm afraid to let Amy go outside now. But she's pretty content to just stay in and draw pictures. Lots of pictures of the hairy man. So that's my experience. I'm now a believer. I just hope it doesn't come back. I was volunteering as a camp counselor on a really nice lake in upstate New York. I loved camp when I was a kid, so I figured it would be nice to give back. Hanging out with the youth of today and seeing what they were all about seemed like a fun way to spend my summer before going back to university. Part of working at the camp is showing up early and getting everything ready for the campers. There's a lot to get ready. You must bring in all the supplies like food and first aid stuff. There are all kinds of activities stuff, sports equipment, you name it. A lot goes into providing for hundreds of kids over a summer. It was my job to get the water activity set up. There was a lot to do. I was sort of surprised they expected me to get it all done by myself. The van was full of bags and cones and netting, and a bunch of other stuff. I dragged bags of stuff to the lake and put everything in order. It took like 10 trips. The sun was setting and dusk was settling in. It was going to be dark soon. I thought it was time to hurry up and get this done with. I was pulling out all the rope for the boundaries when I noticed something in the water. I saw splashes and ripples. I figured it was fish playing around. It was a lake after all. I ignored it and got back to work. A few minutes later, I heard a big plunk, like someone threw a rock in the lake. The ripples were bigger this time and they spread along the surface of the water. I looked around to see if someone was messing with me. A practical joke played on the new counselor or something, but there was nobody around. The sun was behind the trees now, and it was getting colder fast. The hairs on my arms were standing up. I looked out at the water again, and it seemed almost black now. I realized the goosebumps on my arms weren't only because I was cold. I was feeling nervous being near the lake alone. I shook my head and told myself I was being ridiculous. And then I heard splashing again. I looked up startled. I saw something going underwater. I only caught it for a second and I wasn't sure if it was a big fish or something else. Then I saw it again pushing its head through the water. It sat there like an alligator. Just the top of its head was exposed. The head was long and slick but scaly. I rubbed my eyes, literally not sure if I was hallucinating. But there it was, whatever it was. I didn't know what to do. I heard when you see a bear, you're supposed to make a bunch of noise. Or maybe you're supposed to stay quiet and back away. I couldn't remember anything, but I felt like it was a threat. The head was pointed straight at me. The head came up. First I saw the long head emerge. It was like a weird alien lizard, black and shiny and slimy. The eyes were the most horrifying part. Those shone like they had their own lights inside them. The thing rose out of the water and kept rising. It stood up on two legs and stared at me. It looked like the creature from the Black Lagoon, like I saw on TV when I was a kid, but the head was long and freaky like a deformed alligator. Its arms were long and thin, and on the end of each were horrifying, long claws. They were shiny and yellow. It looked at me and I swear to God I thought it was grinning. It had row after row of crooked, sharp teeth. Its right leg took one small step forward and my body took over. I threw the ropes I was holding and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction of the lake. I tripped and flew forward and almost knocked the wind out of myself, but I got up and kept running. I hid behind stacks of kayaks we had for the campers. I caught my breath and snuck my head around the side to look back at the water. That thing still stood there. It wasn't moving. It just stood there. I thought about yelling for help, but I was afraid the only thing that would come running was that monster in the lake. I heard sloshing in the water. I waited another minute and took one more look. I kept praying it was my imagination, but no, it was there. It looked closer to the shore now. I had to run. I turned and took off again and headed toward the main lodge area. I hoped all the other counselors were there. While I sprinted as fast as I could, I turned over my shoulder to look back at the lake. The monster was lowering itself down. It was slow and methodical, staring at me the entire time. I kept running, and when I turned to face where I was going, I saw a counselor ahead of me waving at me. I bent down to catch my breath. The counselor asked me what I was doing. I took a deep breath and took one more look back at the lake. It was completely still and flat. There was no sign of life at all. The counselor asked me again and asked me if I was okay. I told them I was fine, that I saw something in the lake. They asked me what. I couldn't tell them the truth. There was just no way. I was too afraid of sounding crazy. I just told them it was nothing, just some fish or something. They looked at me like I was a little crazy anyway. And that's why I'm sharing this story now. I need to know that there are other people who have seen something like this. I need to know I'm not alone. I was really fascinated with mythical creatures when I was a kid. It was probably because my aunt would let me stay up late with her and watch creature features on TV. It gave me bad dreams, but I still loved it. I hadn't thought about that stuff in a long time as an adult. But a few months ago, I was between jobs and I took this position as a security guard. All I really have to do is be physically present on the property for a certain number of hours and keep an eye out for intruders and respond to any alarms. It's a low-key job. But there's a building across the street from where I work that always gave me the weirdest feeling. It's completely unmarked, and at the time I hadn't really been able to find any solid information on it. And one night something happened that just sent my mind reeling right back to the creature features days. I was just doing my rounds when I saw something detach itself from the shadows near that strange building. It wasn't really my job to look into any strange things happening, but I was curious. The night felt different, a bit spooky, and with all the rumors of weird stuff happening, I felt like a detective. I pointed the flashlight towards where the rustling sound was coming from. Suddenly, next to the building, a tall, towering figure fully stepped into the light. It was like something straight out of a scary movie. My heart began to race, and my eyes must have been as wide as saucers. I was looking at a creature that was taller than a basketball player. Its face was long like a wolf's or a dog's. The creature's body was huge and strong, like a bodybuilder's but covered in dark, thick hair. Its eyes were the strangest part. They were almost glowing, a beautiful amber color that seemed to pierce the darkness. The way it looked at me was chilling. It wasn't like a wild animal stare. It had a human-like intelligence in its eyes. It didn't feel like I was looking at just another creature. It felt like I was looking at something that was thinking and understanding, just like a human. As I tried to make sense of this creature, I began to notice other details. Its chest heaved with each breath, muscles rippling beneath its thick coat. The hair, although coarse and wild, seemed meticulously cared for. The distinct musky scent of wet fur mixed with earth filled the air, overwhelming my senses. The creature's paws were another bizarre sight. They looked almost like hands, human-like but with elongated fingers ending in sharp claws that glinted ominously in the faint light. I could see the power hidden in those claws, the potential to wreak havoc, yet they hung harmlessly by its side. Then there was a shift in its stance, a tiny lowering of its head and a narrowing of its eyes. Fear gripped me then more than before because it was a look I had seen many times, but in humans. It was a look of contemplation, of making decisions. The realization that this was no mere animal sent a fresh wave of terror over me. Yet it did nothing. It merely watched me, its amber eyes now less threatening and more curious. It tilted its head slightly, almost as if it was studying me. The moment was surreal, like time had frozen, with me and this creature under a spotlight created by my trembling flashlight. I was terrified, but I still couldn't stop watching it. It felt like I was standing there forever, but within minutes it suddenly propelled itself into a run that was incredibly fast and effortless for how big it was. It went around the corner of the building and disappeared. I was left standing there, realizing I had witnessed something that shattered the boundaries of everything I had believed to be true. Since the night of that encounter, I have been obsessed with finding out anything I can about these creatures. I have this insatiable need to know what kind of cabal is invested in concealing information about them. I don't think it's right that this information should be suppressed. If you examine the features of dogmen, it seems clear that they can't just be the result of natural evolution. Their unique characteristics set them apart from any other known species. With a canine-looking head, oddly shaped rear legs, and an upper body that looks like a primate, they defy classification. No animal has such a bizarre combination of traits. It's like a wolf or dog has been spliced together with a man-like primate. Some people think that dogmen could have come from ancient matings between wolves and apes, but that seems inconceivable to me. The genetic differences between those two families are too huge. The only explanation that makes sense to me is that dogmen are the product of genetic engineering. But stories of dogmen go back to the 18th century in North America, and they go even farther back in some other cultures. And as far as we've been told, genetic engineering is a pretty recent achievement. I wouldn't even be asking these questions if I hadn't seen that creature with my own eyes. There are just too many impossibilities. I think if dogmen exist, that an extraterrestrial intelligence must have been involved in their creation. Their existence seems to point to beings more advanced than humans, experimenting with life on Earth. It really makes me wonder what other biological projects they might have going on. In the UFO community, there's a pretty widespread belief that there's a hidden military and scientific establishment within the United States. And the speculation is that they are controlling all evidence related to extraterrestrial intelligence. So these things are probably vastly underreported. That's why people who talk about it are still considered crazy. A cabal that controls the military can hunt down any cryptids that venture too close to human civilization. But I think things might finally be starting to shift. There are too many of us who are privately investigating now. And I've even joined a group that's formally organized to investigate any leads we get. I'm still working at the same place, and there are more and more things adding up that indicate something is going on in that building. I don't know if that dogman escaped from there or what, The fact that my job is so low-key gives me a chance to spend a decent amount of time observing things going on over there. It's weird watching people go in and out of that building. It's usually really early in the morning or right around dusk. I can't really go into much detail right now. That's why I haven't mentioned the location, but if the time comes when there is more clarity, I definitely want to keep you in the loop. I think your channel is providing a real service for people to find each other and start cataloging a lot of information that just used to seem so random. Seeing that dogman really woke me up and reminded me that there are a lot of forces at play that need to be brought out of the darkness. This story brings us a strange and unexplainable disappearance from Pennsylvania in the 1800s. The Allegheny National Forest is incredibly vast. It spans a large part of the north-central portion of the state of Pennsylvania. It is just as wild and mysterious as the Appalachian Forest, but lesser known. The area also witnesses many people going missing every year. One of the strangest cases is that of Edward Jewett. The case is still unsolved from over 160 years ago. Edward disappeared from his home in Whitehead Hill, in Warren County. He was a man in his 70s, described as frail and small. He was a very friendly and sweet old man, adorned with a gray beard and a brush of shaggy gray hair that stuck out beneath his small cap. Like all men of the time, he wore leather boots with his trousers tucked in to keep his trousers clean. He was the type of person that practically had no enemies because he was so well received by his peers. He lived with his wife in a small log cabin just a short distance from his son, Enoch. He spent a lot of time visiting with nearby neighbors and socializing, so he was pretty well known in his community. Edward also had a dog named Jerry that was practically his shadow. It was common for Edward to go on daily walks with Jerry following him everywhere. The day of his disappearance was not any different. It was a day in early spring and it was later in the afternoon. Edward had stepped outside, with his wife later claiming he never put on his coat, nor did Jerry follow him outside. It's not likely that Edward had just wandered off by himself, since at the time, he needed assistance walking with a cane. His family and friends couldn't believe that he would have made it more than a mile. After some time had passed, an unknown amount of time, a search had finally begun for Edward. In the mountain range surrounding his tiny cabin, it was a rather large group consisting of 90 men divided into groups of 10. The forest around his log cabin home was searched, checking every nook and cranny, hollow tree, and crevice. Fortunately, there were no open wells, creeks, or mines that would give Edward the possibility of falling into and hurting himself. One thing that's very strange is that at this time, there was still snow on the ground, but virtually no trace of Edward's tracks could be found anywhere. Indeed, if he had wandered off in the woods, they would surely find his tracks. There is suspicion that there was a conflict between Enoch and his father, but it's all hearsay. Is it possible he was grabbed, murdered, and disposed of? Or like many of the others who just vanished without a trace? Did he somehow wander off where nobody would find him? Of course, there are many theories floating around, that he was abducted by aliens or taken by monsters of the forest. But unfortunately, it was so long ago that we'll never know. It seems as though he had just stepped off the face of the earth, disappearing into eternity. There are no answers as to whatever truly happened to Edward Jewett in Pennsylvania. If there's one thing I don't like to talk about openly, it's my run-in with a Sasquatch. Locally, I've become known as a bit of an alarmist fool because of the tale, but I swear to you, and on everything I hold dear, that every word of this is true. In the wooded valleys surrounding Paducah, Kentucky, I came upon one of the creatures 3 winters ago while I was out hunting a runaway hog. I never did find the hog, but I followed an awful foul odor for a good mile back into the sticks, thinking I'd find a rotting hog corpse eventually. The snow wasn't real deep. It had been a mild winter so far, and while the ground was frozen underneath me, the only snow we had was a light dusting that had fallen just that morning, so I didn't have any tracks to go off of. I just smelled the god-awful stench from far off and decided to try to follow my nose, as it was my only hope in the moment. As I got further into the sticks, I couldn't help but feel like there was something else out there with me though. A couple times I felt like I could hear twigs breaking somewhere back behind me. Then, when I turned around to look, I wouldn't see anything. This went on for a good half hour or more. Finally, I stopped turning around. I would just call out behind me, "Who's there?" as I stood still waiting to see if anyone or anything would respond. The deeper into the sticks I got, it seemed like the worse the smell got too. This gave me the sense that I was getting closer to whatever was laid out there rotting, and I felt sure I'd know what happened to my lost hog soon enough. About the third or fourth time, I stopped and called out, "Who's there?" I heard something respond. It was a low grunt, almost hog-like itself. This caused me to spin around fast and wonder, was the hog still alive? Was that what had been following me out there in the woods? I let out a hog call, and I waited, and I heard nothing. I remembered I had a couple cookies in my pocket. I always carried Oreos out with me to check on the horses in the morning to offer them as treats, and I hadn't given all of them away that morning. I pulled an Oreo from my pocket, hoping the hog would want one as badly as the horses always did. "I have a treat for you," I yelled out. Still, nothing. I was getting pretty frustrated with this whole ordeal and feeling a little foolish. I thought about all the other things out in the woods that grunt and ultimately decided I was probably trying to lure in a deer with an Oreo cookie. The smell had now grown unbearable, but there was still no sign of anything rotting anywhere. I decided I was done with my search and I was going to call it a day. I was froze to the bone, and that hog, if it wasn't dead, was too far gone by now to track. I'd just have to wait at home and hope she showed back up on her own time. I got up and started the long walk back to the house. As I did though, that feeling of being watched grew even stronger. Now I could sense something right behind me and even thought I might be hearing the long, drawn-out breath of a large animal or a person. I'm not ashamed to say I was scared. I said out loud, "Whatever you want from me, just tell me." Of course, it didn't say a thing. Slowly, I turned around. This time, it didn't run and hide. About 5 yards back behind me, standing at least 10 feet tall, there was a large hairy mass. It was human in body form and stature, but much bigger all around. It had deep-set dark eyes and a muzzle with large wide-set nostrils set above a large protruding mouth. Its ears were large but sat flat against the side of its head like a human, and it was naked but covered in scraggly long hair. I reckon that's how it had managed to hide so easily among the brush. Now again, this might be something I should be ashamed of, but I'm not. Anyone would have done the same in that situation. I felt a warmth run down my leg as I started wetting myself, staring at it. I know it must have noticed too, what with my jeans darkening and the steam rising up. It got a look on its face that seemed almost like pity as it backed up a few steps. I started walking backwards, carefully stepping. I lifted my hands up and stretched my arms out to the side for balance, and also to show the thing I wasn't trying to be a threat to it of any kind. I had nothing in my hands. I didn't want to fight. As I stepped away, it dawned on me that the smell was getting less and less the further from it I got. It seemed as if the source of the smell was the Sasquatch itself, and it had been getting worse and worse as the Sasquatch got closer to me, while stalking me back in those woods. Now I don't know what he wanted, and I guess I never will. Maybe he was intending to harm me. Maybe he was just curious about what I was and what I was doing out there. Maybe he too was in pursuit of my hog. The only thing I do know for sure is I won't ever venture back in those woods alone again. And the next time I smell something rotting off in the distance, I'm going to turn the other way and not look back. I usually don't tell this story unless I'm drinking. Some people need a little liquid courage to talk to a stranger on the other side of the bar. Me, I need it to talk. It's hard for me to open up. You understand, don't you? It's hard for me to be vulnerable. especially when it reveals that I've encountered something weird or unexplainable. I don't mind putting back a few drinks, but that doesn't mean I want to be the crazy person at the bar, you know. We've all got that friend or that uncle who starts telling stories while the rest of the party swaps awkward stares. I don't want to be that guy, but I have a story, and sometimes it demands to be told. Sometimes I think I saw her, just so I could talk about it. I was working in waste management at the time, specifically in the region's forestry subdivision. Our job was to go out after forestry operations or firefighting measures to clean up the byproduct of those activities. Building a forest makes a mess, as does putting one out when it's burning. It was good work. It made me feel good anyway. I also felt like I was doing my part to protect the environment. I was doing what I could, and that's what mattered. In this specific incident, we were responding after a wildfire had been extinguished. The fire teams involved had used a local river as a natural line of defense, and we were going to remove the waste that they left behind. That meant a few long days in the ash and mud and wading through the shallow river to restore a bit of balance to the forest. One morning, though, as we plunged through the fog and approached the riverside, we learned that we weren't alone. There was a woman there idling beside the river. The dark water was lapping our bare ankles. Her feet were fully submerged. She was wearing a long white dress. From where I stood, I could see that the mud had stained the hem along the bottom. Her hair was in disarray, untamed and hiding her face from us. Not that she looked our way, of course. She was facing the water. She was staring at the current strangely, as if it might deliver whatever she was looking for. We called out. We thought she might have been someone caught in the fire. There was enough ash on her tan skin to make that believable, but she didn't respond to our words. When we tried to get closer, something stopped us. Each pace we took in her direction felt like another step toward the edge of a cliff. My body screamed at me to stop moving. I did. So did everyone else on the scene. That's when we noticed she wasn't moving at all. Her shoulders weren't rising or falling. Her hair wasn't blowing the wind. Where the cold river water kissed her legs, there were no signs of shivers of goose flesh. We told ourselves that meant she was in shock. That validated our theories and made us truly believe that we'd found a survivor. We called for paramedics. They were more than 20 minutes away. 20 minutes we now would have to stand and stare at this woman. I couldn't wait that long. You understand, right? When someone's in trouble, somebody has to act. Everyone has a so-called time clock inside of them that starts ticking down during a crisis. When that clock hits 0, you move. My clock hit 0 first. I moved forward, ignored the stones of anxiety piling up in my guts, and reached for the shoulder of the frozen woman. I thought I saw my friends opening their mouths. I expected to hear them warn me away, but I didn't hear anything in that moment. I felt the raspy threads of her dress on my fingertips. I felt the hard, cold skin underneath. She felt like marble in my hands. She didn't feel real at all. She certainly didn't feel like the fragile body I was expecting. Then she started to turn. Her neck shifted erratically, one short click at a time. She looked my way. I was staring at a curtain of hair at first, dark and thick and curled like snakes. But I saw the shimmer of wet eyes underneath. I thought she was under there, separated from the real world by just this sheet of dark wisps. I thought I'd brush her hair aside and she'd come back to life. Her skin would be soft and warm again. I dragged my knuckles against her wiry locks and laid my eyes on her face. She'd been crying long enough to scar the tissue on her cheeks. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her lips were puffy and cracked. She might have been pretty at one time. That day, she truly looked as if she'd walked through the fire, or maybe stood in the river while the flames raged around her. The other people on site say I screamed after that. They say I fell frantically into the river and thrashed around as if I'd suddenly become epileptic. They rushed to help me and eventually dragged me out. And then the woman was gone. I remember coming to on the side of that river and looking for her, but it was like she was never there. Any footprints she might have left were trampled by my colleagues. I couldn't be upset with them, of course. They'd moved in to save my life. Who knows what would have happened if I'd stayed in that river, kicking and jerking as though I was being attacked. I could have drowned. I don't even want to think what would have happened if I were alone. Unfortunately, that's where the story ends. I don't know the meaning or the purpose or the message you're supposed to walk away from this with. I only know that sometimes stories like mine just beg to be told, and sometimes it's not any deeper than that. I'm Greg, a seasoned hiker and avid birdwatcher. I've experienced my fair share of bizarre wildlife encounters, but my experience on the Appalachian Trail last fall was unparalleled. I was there for migration season, and it's quite a spectacle on the Appalachian Trail. This is one point where a variety of birds like the distinctive orange and black Blackburnian warbler make their long journey from North American breeding grounds to their winter home in South America. I only lived about 300 miles away and was up for the trip. The opportunity for close encounters with these birds drew me to the trail that day. I arrived at my designated home base and got out of the car right away to head onto the trail. I was itching to get out there, and I figured I could set up my sleeping quarters later. As I ventured deep into the trail, my senses were finely tuned, my eyes searching for a glimpse of the tiny Blackburnian warbler. The forest around me was bursting with life. Every inhale brought in a pleasant aroma, the familiar scent of the forest, the damp, earthy smell mingling with the musky fragrance of decomposing foliage. Suddenly, this serene mix of sights, sounds, and smells was disrupted. A heavy, nauseating odor hit me. It was completely overpowering the earthy forest scents that I was accustomed to. It was the stench of decay, pungent and repulsive, hanging heavily in the air. It wasn't merely the smell of an animal's remains left by a predator. Those were fairly common in the forest and had a certain natural odor to them. This was different. It was much stronger and more nauseating. This odor was pervasive. It wasn't just the strength of the smell that was alarming. It was its ominous undercurrent that unsettled me. It hinted at something out of the ordinary, something unnatural. Each step I took felt like a descent into the unknown as the smell grew stronger, gnawing at my senses. It was as if I was being led by this odor towards an unseen danger. This wasn't just a smell. It was a sign, an invisible sign warning me that I was nearing something that didn't belong. I knew that something potentially dangerous lurked nearby. Suddenly, there it was, emerging from the thick foliage. A monstrous entity that stood at least 9 feet tall, a hulking silhouette that appeared all the more ominous against the backdrop of the towering trees. It boasted a strange mix of characteristics with spindly deer-like legs supporting an upright form that was reminiscent of a human's posture. It was an eerie fusion of human and animal that didn't seem to completely belong in either realm. Its body was a chilling sight, like a grotesque sculptural rendition of a walking cadaver. It was as if it was barely covered by a layer of rotting skin stretched taut over a stark skeletal structure. The skin itself was peeling off in places, revealing the bare bones beneath. Every movement it made caused its skin to ripple and tear further, creating a horrific sight. The creature's face was the most unsettling part. It bore an uncanny resemblance to a deer skull, complete with a snout and sharp, bony ridges where one would expect to find a brow. But its eyes were set deep into their hollow sockets, and 2 orbs glowed with an intense, almost phosphorescent, yellow light. When I first spotted it, the creature was eerily still. But soon, it was clear it had noticed me, those glowing eyes fixed on me, sizing me up. Despite its deer-like legs, its movements were rigid and calculated, not the graceful strides associated with such animals. Its unsettling blend of animalistic and deliberate behavior made the encounter more chilling. My first instinct was to flee, but I was momentarily paralyzed, locked in a silent standoff with the creature. But survival instinct prevailed, and I slowly moved away from the creature and then broke out into a full run. Once I was well out of sight, the rest of my hike was a blur. As soon as I reached cell service, I contacted the local park ranger's office. Their reaction was a blend of skepticism and concern, promising to investigate. I never did hear back from them, but I made it a point to check back in to see what they had found. I called the office, but no one answered and I had to leave a message. I never thought I would hear back, but a few days later they informed me they had found nothing unusual. That seemed suspicious to me. Right then and there, I decided to start my own investigation to figure out what I saw, albeit my research would be done online. It didn't take me long to realize that the creature's description matched that of the Wendigo, a mythical creature known to inhabit part of America and Canada. Despite the lack of tangible evidence at the scene, I cannot dismiss what I experienced. The memory of the encounter, the smell of decay, the fear, and fascination, they remain as vivid as ever. As it stands now, I am planning a trip back. I was spending the summer living out of a tent in a Michigan state park. I know that sounds bad. I had a job that summer, but I was going through some things and couldn't afford any decent housing close enough to work. I didn't have a car at the time, so I was limited to places I could bike to and from work. Luckily, the park was close enough and they gave me a discount on a long-term campsite. If I'm honest, the park facilities were a lot nicer than some of the apartments I looked at in town. I mean, public showers definitely weren't my favorite, but I could have done worse that year. The park was pretty nice. Most of it was wooded. There were 2 lakes and 3 campgrounds. 2 of the campgrounds were near the 2 lakes, and the third was situated between where the forest met a small prairie. This was the campground I set up in. There was enough shade from the trees nearby, and I'd get the breeze rolling off the open prairie. Plus, it was a little quieter than the campsites, but the lake. There was a marshy area just beyond the prairie that brought out some bugs, but nothing a citronella candle couldn't take care of. It was a pretty nice setup. I liked it. Living there, I got to know the park staff pretty well. So when something was up, I could tell. I heard about a couple of campers that had issues with a deer, believe it or not. Apparently, it tried to break through their tent in the middle of the night. They could hear hoofbeats outside and saw the shape of antlers ramming the tent fabric. I wasn't quite sure what to make of that, but I never had any problems. There is also someone carving strange runes into trees in random places, but we all just attributed that to some people being weirdos. There was a reward out for any information leading to the culprit, since carving up trees at the state park was technically vandalism. It wasn't a big reward, but I was hard up for cash that year, so I did some sleuthing around, but I didn't find anything. Other than that, I, myself, didn't see anything strange, but the park staff knew something they didn't want to talk about. I asked around and none of them would give details, but just said there had been encounters. Encounters with what? I don't know. They wouldn't tell me. Some weeks, they would close certain sections of the campgrounds or certain trails. There didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. They did permanently close the trail leading to the marsh, but with all the mosquitoes over there, I don't think anybody missed it. I finally asked what was going on, and they said they had been having some issues with wildlife. But like I said, I had gotten to know these people pretty well, and I knew they were lying. I went to the ranger I knew the best and asked point blank, was it safe for me to stay in the park? He said honestly that he didn't know. No one had been injured, but people had been reporting seeing strange beings. They were having a team come in later that week and test the area for anything that might make people hallucinate, because the stories they were telling them were all absolutely insane. But every story had one thing in common, that it was something evil living in the marsh. He said everyone described it a little different, but they all said it came out of the marsh. I tried pressing him for more information, but I could tell he just didn't know what to say to me. A team of scientists did come and test the area when I was there. They asked me a whole bunch of questions since I had been staying there long term, but nothing came of it. They didn't find anything. It was about a week later that the park ranger came and told me they needed to close the park for 1, maybe 2 days and that I had to find somewhere else to go during that time. Well, I didn't have anywhere else to go, and I was saving for a car, so I didn't want to blow any money on a hotel. I know this is bad, but I decided to stash my bike nearby and camp off trail and just hope I wouldn't get caught. I found a spot close enough to the road that I could hike in and out from there to get to work, but it was hidden enough that I thought no one would see me. I did have to pass the marsh, but I wasn't too worried about it. I should have been, but I wasn't. It was pretty late by the time I finished my shift, and I had to bike in after dark. I didn't want to use my flashlight in case any of the rangers were there overnight for some reason. They wouldn't say why they were closing the park, but I assumed something was going on. There were several black vans in parking lot by the main office when I left. Retelling this story out loud, I feel like such an idiot. I should have known something was out there and that I should have just listened to the ranger, but I was young and dumb and thought I'd be fine. I made it safely back to my camp in the dark, but just as I got there, I heard something scream. It wasn't a human sound, and it was coming from the direction of the marsh. I saw lights on the hill and heard human voices nearby. I crawled through the grass towards them to see what was going on. It took me a while to get there, but I made it all the way to the marsh without being seen. There were at least a dozen men in tactical gear, like bulletproof vests and guns. They didn't have any type of uniform that I recognized. They were surrounding the marsh with spotlights pointed towards it. It was quiet for a moment before something moved under the water. The only thing I could see was what looked like the points of deer antlers poking out of the swamp. The moved like it was swimming underwater, and suddenly the men with guns all open fired. It was so bright I thought I saw daylight for a second. Everything went quiet again. Two of the men waded into the water to retrieve whatever they had shot to pieces. I don't even know how to describe it. They pulled it out with a rope. It looked like a person but had the antlers of a deer. Its limbs were long, too long to be human, and its fingers looked like claws. Its face was pretty shot up, but it looked like it had a snout at one point. I have no idea what it was or what to even compare it to. The park opened as usual the next day. The black vehicles were nowhere to be seen, and the marsh trail was open to the public again. I asked the ranger why the park had been closed, and he told me that the scientists found some chemical in the marsh that had been making people hallucinate, and they had to neutralize it. He reassured me the park was safe again, and that was that. I wanted to ask more questions, but I was sure he would have told me I had hallucinated the whole thing. But I can tell you for certain that those were no scientists treating some chemical in the marsh. My sighting happened back in the summertime of 2013. My uncle and I were up fishing on a river near Montapaka in Quebec. We parked our truck at the end of a road, went down into the woods, and hiked upstream for about 1 mile or so. It was around 1 p.m. in the afternoon. We had just caught some walleye, so we stopped to have lunch under a big willow that hung out over the river. It was very relaxing, and we were enjoying the warmth of the sun. The willow tree provided a nice little bit of shade, so we set up our chairs under it and ate our sandwiches. We were filthy and dirty from fishing. I had just taken a bite when I looked up and saw this thing standing on 2 legs roughly 40 feet away from us. It was moving in a really weird way, which I can only describe as being like a bear looks when it walks upright, but not quite as jerky. It wasn't looking at me or anything, but its eyes seemed to be focused behind me. I assumed that whatever it was after was running off in our direction, but now had disappeared into the woods. The thing seemed to be on a mission. At least that's how I understood it, and at this point I actually did just think it was a bear and was happy that it was now gone. After eating, I walked upstream in the direction it disappeared, when I heard something large charging through the woods coming towards me very fast from downstream. The first thing that ran through my mind was it's either a large buck or a bear, so I stood frozen thinking, crap, this is not going to be good. Fortunately, it just came right past me and my uncle, who had also come to the river to wash his hands. I could now see it clearly. This huge wolf biped came rushing at us, but then passed right by us. It was full-on chasing this huge game that was going by. A large elk. Actually, there were two elk, one large bull and a smaller cow. The wolf creature gave pursuit to the larger one. My uncle stood there stiff as a board, and you could hear him breathing behind me. He was completely terrified. Okay, I was too. The elk, both of them, ran into the trees right by where we had parked and eaten. Then, this wolf went past us too and over to that same spot in a rush after them. It disappeared into the woods about 100 or so feet from us, but it didn't stop. You could still hear it running, giving chase, while also snorting loudly as it continued off in the woods. I don't think it saw us crouched down beneath the willow tree originally. Then everything got silent again, and that was the tip-off. That's when we knew we weren't alone. There was another one of these things watching us, a much bigger one, the alpha male. I could hear it breathing heavily, and there was a large cluster of fallen trees right beside us, so I crouched down between some dead wood, and I could see where it was. It was staring at us with its head slightly cocked to one side. It stayed perfectly still. It looked unlike the other one that was shaggier and wolf-like. This one was completely black and much more muscularly built. It made this very odd sound that reminded me of cattle, but on a much deeper scale. My uncle saw it next and he screamed out to me, "We have to go now." Now that caught my attention because my uncle is usually very calm. So we just threw our stuff in and jumped into his truck, pretty much leaving behind our fishing gear. I knew what this thing was, but I just couldn't figure out why it would be here in this place. There were 3 more of them already emerging from the trees near where they ran after the 2 elk. I didn't want to think about what else was out here. We got in the truck and drove off back down the road until we came to the paved state road, which would lead us back to town. The city is about 60 miles east from where we went fishing and straight south. When we returned home, I explained to my mother what had happened, as well as some family friends who were interested in hearing about it. They had also apparently heard rumors of a bizarre bipedal wolf living up around that mountain. To this day, I don't exactly have a clue as to what on earth we encountered, even though I had a faint idea, or at least I thought I did. But whatever these animals are, they did not like that we invaded their hunting territory. I took a job that had me working the night shift. I didn't really mind too much. The sleep schedule change was a bit of a challenge at first, but I got used to it. The drive to and from work was a lot less complicated with fewer cars on the road. If I had to make that same trip during the day, I would certainly be stuck in rush hour as soon as I crossed the bridge, and my drive was an hour one way as it was. I should probably explain that I live in a pretty rural area, but I work in the nearest large city. So my commute takes me through some woods, some farmlands, and then into the suburbs and finally the city. The drive goes pretty quick at night. I usually put on a podcast or an audiobook, and I'm there in no time. One night I was driving home around 3 a.m. I was just about in the area where the suburbs fall away into the countryside. I wasn't quite to farm country yet, but I was getting close. I saw an amber light in the distance over what looked like an open field. It definitely wasn't a house or anything, but it was hard to tell as I was watching the road. The light glowed for maybe a minute before going dark again. It was too bright to be a house light and way too expansive to be a light from a vehicle. It looked like the swath of light you'd get from super bright street lamp, but it was in the middle of a field. Something deep in my gut told me to stop the car and find a way to turn around, but I was on the freeway and it was easier to keep driving. I definitely knew there was something wrong or odd. I didn't know what, but I knew I didn't want to be there. I was getting closer to the light. It was definitely in a farm field. It would flash on for a minute and then go dark again. My brain told me it must be some type of farm vehicle, but I knew that just wasn't the case. As I got closer, the whole field lit up, and there no source of the light that I could see. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced. I pulled over along the edge of the freeway when I reached the field. It was dark when I stopped. I didn't hear anything odd. I didn't smell anything. There appeared to be nothing wrong besides this mysterious light. I probably sat there on the side of the road for 5 minutes before the light flashed again. There was a white-tailed deer standing there under the light, along with a few cows. I finally recognized the area. It was a local dairy farm. The animals under the light all looked distressed and confused. I still couldn't figure out where the light was coming from, but it seemed to light up the whole field at that point. And then suddenly, the deer disappeared right in front of me. Completely disappeared. It looked like it got sucked down into the earth. It was gone. And then the light went out. I hurriedly put my car in drive, and then the light came again. This time, 3 of the cows got sucked down. They were there one moment and just gone the next. The earth didn't open up. There was no sinkhole, just grass. And the cows were just sucked down. That's the only way I can explain it that makes sense. But the cows disappeared and the light went out again. I drove the hell out of there before the light could come back. I think I was going about 120 the rest of the way home. It was the most terrifying drive of my life. I kept looking in the rearview mirror to see if the light would show up. It messed me up. I called in sick for nearly a week before I could drive that stretch of road again. I still don't like driving past it, even in the daylight. I heard later that other people saw it too. Not just there in that cow pasture, but they saw it other places around. And that dairy farmer, he had been complaining that something was attacking his cows. He thought it was wolves. I didn't know what to tell him, so I didn't say anything. I mean, what would I even say? Your cows disappeared into the grown under some strange orange light at 3 a.m. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. This happened only last year. I don't know where those cows went, but I think about it every night. I haven't seen the light since that night. I ended up switching to a day shift so I didn't have to make that drive at night ever again. I was having panic attacks just thinking about it. If anyone else has ever seen the lights, please tell your story so I know I'm not crazy. Here, in the remotest parts of this land, we don't see much at night. However, I feel compelled to write about an incident that happened back in autumn of 2002. Something that has disturbed me ever since and made me feel afraid to sleep or even leave my house for a long time. I was living in a farmhouse with my new husband and daughter. My daughter at the time was only around 6 months old, and she kept waking during the night. I would have to get up with her at least once every night to settle her, feed her, and pacify her. At times, I would sing a lullaby in the kitchen as I cradled her, and I would look out at the empty apartment blocks. Mostly I liked looking at the small communal garden we were given as a grant from the government. On one occasion, my husband made a joke that my lullaby would attract criminals to the apartment complex. It was quite a haunting tune, he said. It was a tune that my own grandmother had sung to me, and she left me the words on a little sheet of paper. She always told me that it kept evil spirits away and would protect the crops from any scourges. I was not aware that it sounded haunting because I was so used to it, and honestly, soothed by it. But occasionally as I sang it to my daughter, I would see little flickers of light out in the other windows of the apartment complex, as if people had awoken to my singing. On this particular night, I was singing the lullaby, and then heard a screeching sound from the small garden outside. Walking over to my window, still singing the lullaby, I saw something that nearly made me drop my daughter. This creature, something that was not human, was something I'd never seen, and it was like it was staring at me. Red eyes, but slits, almost. It appeared to be the size and shape of a hyena, and that was really the only creature it reminded me of. It was brown and had kind of a long tail, but what was most peculiar was that the creature had large wings. They kind of extended outwards like a huge web, and it was really pale on the inside. It was bizarre and frighteningly ugly. I covered my daughter's eyes, but I had a feeling that she had glimpsed it. Its face was weird too. It was kind of goblin fox-like. and it had strange features and was terrifying and demonic. I tried to call for my husband, but words would not leave my mouth. I was totally perplexed by this creature that was sitting in the garden just yards away. I felt sick and troubled. Where had this creature come from? What did it want from me? These were all questions that stirred in my mind. And eventually I managed to back away from the window and walk up the stairs. I awoke my husband, who totally believed me and came down with a raised baseball bat. When we got down to the window, the creature had gone. We debated calling the police, but we decided not to. We didn't want to make the police think that I was off my rocker and a threat or danger to my child. All I know is there are wild and not so wonderful creatures in the animal kingdom. Things that even the most explorative environmentalists can't comprehend. Whatever it was, I saw it with my own 2 eyes. And because it was so disturbing, I have lived a life fraught with tensions and anxiety ever since. My daughter, too, has now encountered problems of her own. Now 20, she still experiences night terrors and calls me in panic if she is home alone. It's as if that memory has been etched into her brain, but I have never brought it to fruition. I have never discussed it with her, but it's definitely affecting her. Now, we stayed at that apartment for 2 years after the incident, and any time I had to wake during the night to go to the kitchen, I would feel dread, expecting to see this thing out there again. I feared it was waiting to reappear and resurface those horrible memories. Thank goodness my husband came down with me every time after that, and luckily as my daughter got older, I had to do it less and less. Anyway, it never did surface again, and that was the only time I would see it. I grew up in the woods of northern Minnesota. There are things out there in the wild lands that locals don't like to talk about. Small town secrets, I suppose. Most of them were harmless. Others, not so much. The area I lived in was about as far north as you could get before you crossed over into Canada. The nearest town had less than 100 people, including my family. As a kid, we had all these rules. Everybody's family had them. My parents said it was to keep us safe from predators. Don't go out after dark. Don't go into the woods alone. And if you smell something dead, get away and get inside as quick as you can. There's probably a bear nearby protecting its kill. We had wolves, black bears, and mountain lions in the area, so it made perfect sense to us. Everybody's parents had the same rules. I mean, my backyard was practically a bear highway if there was such a thing. It would be easy to have an encounter go bad if you weren't careful. There were 2 stories of people disappearing in the town. Both were attributed to incidents with wildlife. One was a man out alone in the woods. It was the 1920s or 30s, if my memory serves. He lived pretty far out there in the woods. The cabin he built for himself has since been torn down, but the foundation is still there if you know where to look. Anyway, the story I heard was that he didn't show up for work one day, and when they went to check on him, they found the door to his cabin left open but no sign of him anywhere. They searched around the cabin and could smell what they thought was a carcass, but they couldn't find it. They looked everywhere but couldn't find the source of the smell. His death was blamed on a black bear. They figured the bear cached his body somewhere, explaining the smell. Predatory black bears attacks are rare, but they do happen. The other incident was of a kid in the year 1983, walking home from friend's house alone. It was only about a mile walk, but the roadway passed through the woods. Kid never made it there. That's the story everybody's parents always used to scare them into following the rules. The investigation couldn't find any trace of that kid or what happened. They found what looked like moose tracks near the area, but that was it. No other predators. To be honest, it could have been a moose. Those things are dangerous. However, I think it was something else entirely. When I was about 12 years old, I was best friends with the neighbor girl. The easiest way to get to her house was a deer trail that started in my backyard and ran about a half mile through the woods. My parents were very strict with me about the rules. I wasn't allowed to use the trail after dusk. I had to tell them when I was leaving and had to call them from my friend's house as soon as I arrived. And I had to carry bear spray at all times. I had run into bears before out there without a problem. Normally you just yell and wave your arms and they run away. It's only when they have cubs that you need to worry. But I kept my bear spray close. Always. There was one day that I was walking home on the trail. It was at least an hour before dusk, I know that much. If I was out even near dusk, I would have been in so much trouble. I probably wouldn't have been allowed to leave my room until high school graduation. That's how serious the rules were. I thought the rules were to protect me from bears, but that wasn't it at all. There's something else that lives in the woods up there, and it's a lot more dangerous than a black bear. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it got. A sudden silence just washed itself over the woods. It was like I was in a movie and someone pushed mute. I remember seeing leaves blowing in the wind, but I couldn't hear them moving. That's when I smelled it. It was the foulest thing I have smelled in my life, and I've walked up on near week-old roadkill. This was worse. It was definitely the stench of something dead, but there was something else there too. Like if you've ever smelled a really bad infection. That's the best I can describe it. I immediately knew I was in trouble. My parents said if I ever smelled anything dead, there was likely a predator nearby. I pulled the safety stopper off the trigger of the bear spray I was carrying and held it up in front of me. I remember I pulled my shirt up over my nose, hoping the material would somehow stifle the smell. Then I looked out at the trail ahead of me. There was a tiny rabbit sitting there out in the open. Its eyes were wide and it was shivering, but it didn't move. I don't know why it didn't just run. I heard something moving behind me, something walking. They were hoofbeats. I had my bear spray in my hand, ready to use it in case it was a moose. I turned around and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was about the size of an elk. It had the body of an elk and the antlers of an elk. Full antlers, even in the summer. Its hair was peeling off, exposing areas of raw flesh and even the bones underneath. It was leaking from its wounds. There were flies buzzing around it like it was a corpse. It definitely smelled like a corpse, but it seemed to have no trouble walking. I pointed the bear spray at its face and then I froze. It had no face. Its head was a bare skull, bone white. The skin was hanging loose around its neck. The skull was stripped completely bare. It had no eyes, no nose. It walked straight past me like I wasn't even there and went straight for the rabbit. The stupid rabbit didn't even try to run. The undead elk grabbed it with its teeth and threw it up in the air like a coyote does and then swallowed it whole. It might have not had eyes or a nose, but it did appear to have a tongue. Its jaw cracked when it opened its mouth. After watching it make quick work of the rabbit, I ran. I didn't want to stay and find out what it might do to me. As soon as I saw it, I knew this was the creature responsible for the disappearances. It had to be, and I wasn't going to be its next victim. The only form of defense I had was the bear spray. I don't imagine it would work on this thing. I never took that trail through the woods again. My parents caught on as soon as I started asking them to drive me to my friend's house instead of walk. They asked me if I saw it, and I said yes. And that was the end of the conversation. They never told me what it was, and I never asked. There are things you just don't talk about in towns like this. Good day, Donovan. I've always been skeptical of the unexplainable, and I still am. However, since seeing your channel, I believe I may have a story to tell you. I'm not sure who else I should mention this to. It's been around 5 years since my incident, and I've been struggling with myself ever since. I live in northern Ohio, where there are numerous beautiful metro parks with various pathways to walk on. I dropped a lot of weight trekking through those woods with my dogs years ago. I would generally go alone with my dogs because I love to go early in the morning on weekends. And also, it was difficult to find someone ready to walk 5+ miles at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. On a random summer Saturday, I decided to do just that and took the largest of my 3 dogs, a medium-sized shepherd mix, so it was just myself and him. He was about 4 years old, well-trained, and could be trusted off-leash with humans, other dogs, and children. On this particular day, though, I kept him close and on his leash while we hiked along paths with high drop-offs. I didn't want to cope with retrieving my dog if he fell from a cliff in a remote region early in the morning, by myself, amid prickers and dense underbrush. Again, it was early. There were no other cars in the parking area and no one on the walkways when I arrived. It was a popular place, but I wanted to take in the scenery before more people arrived on this beautiful day. We were on a higher ground path that had been dug out of a large, steep mountainside with tight curves. The gravel route allowed me to hear if somebody was approaching from the front or the back. Another trail ran virtually parallel to mine lower down the hillside. You couldn't see the route, but you could see other hikers if they were on it, from their upper torso to the top of their heads. I know this because I observed a man with longer hair, just enough to cover his ears, wearing a nicer looking light blue shirt, walking in the same direction as me and my dog on the path below. I also know that our hiking tracks would not intersect for a long time, and that I would have to travel down a lengthy, steep piece of path before reaching the one he was on. The kind of incline where if I were going up, I would definitely need to take a couple of breaks to collect my breath. I'm a 5'4" female who was somewhat overweight but otherwise in good shape at the time. Regardless, that hill was steep, which is why I wanted to go down this time. I lost sight of the man as my attention was drawn to my dog, who began pushing me ahead around another bend in the mountainside. He only did it when he saw a squirrel or something, but there was no rustle of leaves, nothing at all. The area was quiet, and all I could hear was my dog panting and pulling me, and the sound of gravel shifting beneath our feet. My dog wasn't very large, so he wasn't pulling me out of control. I had 2 hands on his leash and was still walking, albeit at a faster rate. The man in the light blue shirt looked to be walking in the opposite direction as we turned around the bend. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me that quickly while both trekking up that steep trail and making his way through the dense brush on the hillside without getting tired. He seemed to emerge out of nowhere, and my dog went totally crazy, hunched down, fur rising up, ears pointed back, teeth showing, but both of us were still walking ahead, about to pass this man. The man appeared a bit odd in the way he was dressed for walking in an area like this. His light blue button-down shirt had just the bottom 3 buttons buttoned, exposing his chest. He was also dressed nicely, with khaki pants and nicer-looking shoes, and he was clean. His thicker hair obscured his eyes. He walked strangely, almost with a limp, and his arms didn't swing like ours do while walking. It's difficult to explain. His stride jerked in my direction, but it was still slow. At this time, I had my dog on a very short lead, practically against my body on the opposite side of me from where the man was. I had no idea why my dog was acting so violently, and the next seconds felt like a terrifying blur. Yet I have a very strong memory of this experience. Before he could get any closer, my dog yanked both of my arms, leapt up, and bit the man on the arm. I was very shocked and humiliated. My dog had never displayed any sign of this behavior before. All I could think about was whether I could now potentially lose my dog because he had harmed someone. When the man jumped back, his hair split, and I saw his eyes. They were dark and frightening. His mouth looked to be wide all the time, as if he couldn't close it. He clutched his bitten arm, but there was no blood on it. His hands moved strangely, and he mumbled something beneath his breath. Then he walked in the opposite direction, holding his arm and pointing at my dog, saying, "It bites me," as his mouth was drooping open. His sentences were drawn out and sluggish, nearly difficult to understand. I noticed that there were holes in his clothes, but no blood, which was really strange. I wish I didn't have to explain it this way, but he appeared to be suffering from some form of mental disease. Yet his eyes revealed a different narrative. Outgoing around clothed and acting the way he was beyond creepy, and I managed to keep my cool. In frightening or emergency situations, I've always been able to think swiftly and clearly. The incident ended as quickly as it happened, My dog proceeded to pull me along with his ears up and bouncing as he walked, close by my side, almost thankful to be getting away from the man. After that hike, I safely returned to my car, but I never saw the man again. I didn't return to that trail for years since I was terrified of getting into trouble or worse, losing my dog. This is where the narrative becomes odd. A few days after the event, my dog began acting aggressively at random, with no warning. His ears didn't tilt back, his fur didn't stand up, and he didn't growl, yet he would occasionally attack my two smaller dogs out of nowhere. He was changed, very different. Other days, he'd look out into nothing for a few moments, as if in a trance, or he would pant randomly, as if he was extremely thirsty or tired, things he'd never done before. It happened infrequently for 2 years. Then his acts became more frequent absolutely unexpectedly. It was never over food or over needing attention. Nothing came to mind. I took him to his vet who prescribed calming medication, but it didn't help, or at least I couldn't tell because his movements were so erratic. The vet also worried me because of how concerned they were with his behavior. Then I was told to consult a canine behaviorist, which I did, and I spoke with 2 of them. Both of them said that his breed could indicate mental illness. So I paid a lot extra to have him thoroughly examined, an MRI and everything, and they discovered nothing out of the ordinary. His tantrums were becoming more frequent and my other 2 dogs were scared of him. Our household was tense. Like a good dog mom, I had to keep him muzzled and segregated from the other dogs at all times, taking many walks per day to ensure everyone was exercised, fed, and tired out. I could see he despised his muzzle, and when he was being normal, I felt terrible for the measures I had to take, which also felt like I was giving him a bad existence. It saddened me greatly. He was his usual cheerful, well-behaved self until he wasn't, and then he became a monster. His violence was never directed at me, but the final straw came when I was hurt while attempting to break up a fight between him and one of my other dogs. I didn't know what to do. I was defeated and turned into a sobbing, blubbering mess since I knew the vet was going to say I had to say goodbye to him. His mind was just too far gone and it was becoming a safety issue. On the day that was planned to be his last, I took him on an 8-mile trip in the same woods where we had our incident with the man in blue all those years before. It was a coincidence to be there, but he seemed to be extra agitated and angry. We got home and the vet arrived and everything was so strange. The vet said that something was gravely wrong and that this was the only option. Throughout the procedure, my dog seemed to turn into something else. Like he had morphed into something, or maybe yet showed his true self. My dog gazed at me and shockingly, his eyes matched those of the man we saw years before, as he was finally letting go, utterly maxed out on chemicals, which the doctor claimed was enough to down a St. Bernard. Every day I miss him, but I can't help but think that the man we saw left an impact, a menace or something otherworldly within my beloved dog, gradually changing his behavior over time, almost as if he was possessed. It hurts to believe I did something wrong, but it's just me and my dogs. They were and are spoilt beyond most human children, yet nothing I did, nor the thousands of dollars I spent, could influence the outcome of my dog's life. I've never informed anyone about this, including my now fiancé. I don't think anyone would believe it given my long track record of remaining calm in difficult situations or my ongoing search for what is genuine in this life. I have no idea who that man was or what he desired. Thankfully, he never got the chance to touch me. Based on the information I've read about online and heard on your channel, I'm thinking it could have been a skinwalker or a shapeshifter that took over my dog. If so, he deserved what happened to him even if it changed my dog forever. They say that all dogs go to paradise, and knowing how much I loved him, I sincerely hope he made it there safely. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. Perhaps one of your listeners can elaborate on who or what that man or creature was. I'd love to know what thing it was that basically stole my dog away from me. I lost my career because of this. For 20 years, that career defined me. I haven't covered. I'm not sure that I ever will. If my career's gone, though, I might as well talk about what happened. They don't realize it, but they gave me nothing to lose. I worked in veterinary forensics in a lab based out of the southern United States. My specific responsibility was DNA typing, sequencing, and identification. The lab offered its services to federal, state, and private agencies. I don't imagine that veterinary forensics is a job that most people are familiar with. After one of these agencies would hire us, it would be up to me to identify the exact species or DNA fingerprint of animals involved in criminal acts perpetrated by human beings. If a dogfighting ring had been broken up, I would identify the specific breed of any casualties. If an unidentified carcass was recovered from a trafficking or illegal hunting operation, I would determine what type of animal it once was. The evidence I prepared would be used in court cases that shut these criminal operations down. It was a fulfilling job. I felt like I was doing my part to make the world a better place. A strange request came in one day. It was submitted by a private agency, but came equipped with the same levels of ambiguity and prioritization that federal jobs often carried. This specific agency had recovered a carcass that needed to be identified. We didn't have any information to go off of, so when a sample of the specimen arrived at our lab, I was starting at square one. Physically, the flesh we received seemed aquatic in origin. It was a pale white and seemed like it had been eroded by salt water. I was worried that the DNA would be compromised. Initial tests revealed no signs of erosion, however, and no traces of foreign water of any kind. I thought then that whatever land animal it belonged to had been without its circulatory system for so long that it had lost whatever pigmentation it normally had. It was a stretch, and I knew that, but the color and texture of the skin were making me scratch my head. We moved on to the various steps involved in DNA identification. What we learned didn't make any sense. The DNA wasn't very far from our own. The order of the nucleotides was rearranged in a few areas, moving it further away from our species or any species of ape. It belonged to something else, we realized. We ran the tests again. The results didn't make any sense. Trying to understand them while looking back at the pale glob of flesh was making our skin crawl. We got the same results. What we were looking at, we knew, was either a grossly mutated sequence of human DNA or something entirely unidentified. Neither option was the responsibility of our facility. We worked in veterinary forensics, and there was a chance that this DNA didn't belong to an animal species at all. More importantly, if the agency who contacted us knew this in the first place, they were willfully keeping this information from the government agencies that should have been involved in the identification of human remains. I contacted our employers personally and told them the results of our tests. They disagreed with me, as if the sequences we had identified could somehow be mistranslated. More alarmingly, they demanded I hand over the genetic material we had in our possession and purge any information that we had gathered from our records. I refused. Instead, I forwarded our findings and photographs of the specimen to as many organizations as I could. There wasn't a forensics lab in the country that didn't receive an email from me that day. I made sure that the FBI was informed as well. You see, I still believed at the time that the independent agency we were working for wasn't affiliated directly with our government. Plenty of conspiracies traveled through my mind, but none of them connected our mysterious employers to the powers that be. That was until the FBI arrived the following day. Everything that was asked of me by the private agency was executed instead by the FBI themselves. They took the genetic material. They shoved our paper records into boxes, and they wiped our cloud servers of any data gathered in the last 6 months. They erased everything. Suddenly, it was like we never even worked for the agency in question. It was like we never saw the unidentified lump of flesh and never ran our tests to identify its origins. As far as anyone else was concerned, the lab I worked for hadn't been involved in any forensic studies for 6 months. I could have lived with that, I think. If it had stopped there, I could have convinced myself that the responsibility had transitioned into more capable hands. I was the one who reached out to the FBI after all. However they wanted to handle the incident was for them to decide and not me. I would have been happy to return to work. Then I was fired. Any individual within the company who had come into direct contact with the specimen was let go. One by one, we were plucked out of our profession and dropped into the unknown. Someone worked to silence us, even before we considered talking. They weren't willing to take the chance. And through everything they've done, they've succeeded. I work at a grocery store now. I hate it. There isn't a forensics laboratory in the country that will look at my resume. My profession and my life have been totally erased. If it wasn't for my frustration, I'd probably have given up by now. I'd fall into that zombified state of contentment, scanning item after item, taking it day by day. But I'm mad. I want to know the truth. I want to know what was worth sacrificing my life for. What were those remains and where did they come from? I'm really hoping to get answers. Hi, Donovan. I have something absolutely terrifying to share. This happened 3 months ago behind my house in a small town in western Pennsylvania. I had a few friends over on a Saturday evening and we were all hanging out in my backyard having a cornhole tournament. I recently got really into cornhole and so did a few of my friends, so we play now every chance we get. I spent so much money on different kinds of bags you wouldn't believe. Anyways, it's about 8 p.m. and we had been playing for a few hours and having some drinks when we started hearing this really weird noise come from the back of my property. We were playing under the lights because I have a big old spotlight in my backyard so we can play late at night. Now I'm a hunter, and so are a lot of my friends, and we all hear this noise and no one recognizes what it could be. I don't even know if I could describe it, but imagine a bullfrog mixed with a gorilla. I know that sounds batshit crazy, but that's the best I can describe it. I know it doesn't make any sense, and we felt the same way, but we kept hearing it, so my one buddy John thought it was a good idea to go in the woods and see if we can find what is making this sound. There was 4 of us who decided to go looking, and I grabbed a spotlight and we set off into the woods. Now, when we were playing cornhole, it sounded like this thing was maybe 40 to 50 yards away, as best as I could tell. We are in the woods about where I thought it was coming from, and now the sound is even further away. So we go in further, and the sound is moving like it's either trying to get away or trying to bait us in for a trap. Well, it was certainly the latter, because what happens next is why we don't play cornhole at my house anymore. My friend John shouts out to the group, "Hey, look right there." We see this thing because I don't know what to call it. This yellowish, hairless creature standing behind the trees with these claws wrapped around the front of the tree like it was hugging it. As soon as John said that, this thing jumps out from behind the tree and starts making these crazy sounds coming from the back of its throat. It had this rectangular head and very deep-set eyes that were glowing red. The creature was something straight out of a scary movie. It was as tall as a basketball hoop, its bare yellow skin shining in our flashlight's beam. The skin was smooth, hairless, and kind of shiny, making it look really weird and creepy. Its claws were just as scary. Long, black, and curved like a hawk's talons. They looked like they could rip through anything. They were attached to long, finger-like hands that reminded me of tree branches. The creature's arms were big and strong, much larger than a normal person's, and ended in these freaky hands. The creature's head was rectangle-shaped, which was really strange. It had no hair and no ears that we could see. The eyes were the scariest part. They were set deep in its head, glowing bright red like 2 burning embers. When I looked into those eyes, it felt like this thing was super old and super smart, like it knew things we didn't. Its mouth was wide and filled with sharp yellow teeth. It looked like it could easily bite through a steak. The weird noises we'd heard were coming from this creature, sounding even louder and scarier now. The noises echoed through the quiet woods, making me shiver. The way this creature moved was just as freaky. It was really quiet and smooth, like a cat stalking its prey. Every step it took was so silent and smooth, It seemed almost like a dance. This thing looked like it was used to moving in the dark, and it was really good at it. Now it was moving towards us. Suddenly, the fun of playing cornhole and hanging out in my backyard seemed a million miles away. We were in the middle of the woods facing this terrifying creature, and it was the scariest moment of my life. The moment seemed to stretch forever, and then suddenly the creature leapt towards us. Its jump was long and high, like some superpowered kangaroo. We didn't have time to think. Instinct took over and we all started running. We ran as fast as we could, the woods becoming a blur around us. The creature's monstrous cries echoed through the night, sounding closer and closer. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. I could hear my friends panting, their heavy breaths matching the rhythm of our frantic footsteps. In the panic, I lost my grip on the spotlight and it fell, plunging us into darkness. All we could see were the shadows of the trees and the glowing red eyes of the creature chasing us. It was like a nightmare come to life. We finally broke through the edge of the woods, stumbling onto the open ground of my backyard. The bright lights from the house seemed welcoming and comforting after the terrifying darkness. We didn't stop though. We kept running, heading straight for the safety of the house. Bursting through the back door, we slammed it shut and locked it. Our heavy breaths were the only sounds in the silent house. We peered out the window, half expecting to see those glowing red eyes staring back at us. But there was nothing there, just the peaceful, quiet night. The creature had stopped at the edge of the woods, a shadowy figure barely visible in the darkness. We didn't dare to go back outside that night, and I don't think any of us slept. We just stayed in the living room, jumping at every sound, waiting for the sun to rise. The next day, we found the cornhole boards overturned and the bags scattered everywhere. The backyard looked like a storm had swept through it, but the woods were quiet. The creature was gone, and so our late-night cornhole games ended. We still hang out, but now we do it inside, safe behind locked doors. As for the creature, we never saw it again. But sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear that strange noise coming from the woods, and I shudder, remembering those glowing red eyes. I'm Greg, a middle-aged man who spent his life outdoors, camping and trekking. Last year, I participated in a solo survival challenge in a remote mountain region, something I now profoundly regret. I'd chosen a site deep in the wilderness, a place few people ever visit. For the first few days, everything was normal. It was just me, nature and my survival skills. But then, odd things started happening. I'd returned to camp to find my things scattered about, as if something was rifling through them. I blamed the wind at first, or maybe some curious critters. After the first incident of my campsite being disturbed, I tried brushing it off. But as the days passed, I started noticing other peculiar signs. One morning, I found odd tracks near my campsite, unlike any animal I'd seen before. They were hoof-like but larger, and the print pattern was bizarre, almost as if whatever left them was walking on two legs. Despite all these signs, I still tried to rationalize attributing it to the wildlife or my isolation-induced imagination. But deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was not alone, and something unknown was lurking around. One night, a few days into my challenge, I had the encounter. Sitting by my fire, I heard a rustle. Thinking it was a bear or a deer, I grabbed my flashlight, but what I saw in the beam's reach was far from ordinary. It was 6 feet tall with hawked legs and scaled skin, like a bizarre winged beast. Its face was demonic with an exterior skull, akin to a terrifying horse-like goblin creature. But what chilled me to the bone were its eyes, a set of glowing red that shone in the darkness. The shock of seeing such a beast was instant and paralyzing. My blood ran cold and I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. It wasn't just fear, it was a profound primal terror that gripped me. The creature moved with an odd grace, its hawked legs bending and straightening with a gait that was neither a walk nor a crawl. It was silent, save for the rustling of the underbrush beneath it. But the silence was more terrifying than any sound it could have made. As we locked eyes, it emitted a low growl, resonating through the quiet night. It was a sound like nothing I've ever heard before, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my very core. I froze, unable to believe what I was seeing. We locked eyes, and I could feel a strange understanding pass between us, like it knew I posed no threat. After a moment that felt like an eternity, it turned around and disappeared into the night. Once the creature disappeared into the darkness, leaving me with a pounding heart and trembling hands, I made an impulsive decision to follow it. I was driven by a mix of fear, curiosity, and the slight adrenaline rush that the encounter had induced. I picked up my flashlight, took a deep breath, and started following the tracks it left behind. The sulfur smell was stronger now, almost like a guiding path. I kept my distance, hoping not to startle the creature or provoke it. I also tried to document what I could. I had a small notebook and pen, and I scribbled down everything I could remember about the creature. But my hands were shaking so badly, and the light was so dim that the notes came out more like scribbles than coherent text. Despite my attempts, I eventually lost the trail, the creature vanishing as mysteriously as it had appeared. All I was left with were my rushed notes and a sense of overwhelming dread. The encounter with the creature left me mentally and emotionally scarred. Eventually, weeks passed, but every time I closed my eyes, I still saw those glowing red eyes staring back at me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, the terrifying face etched into my mind. The dread didn't leave me in the day either. Every little sound, every shadow made me jumpy. It was as if I was constantly on edge, anticipating another encounter, though I was miles away from that remote campsite. The once calming wilderness now felt hostile and ominous. Physically, I lost weight. I could barely eat, the sulfur smell lingering in my nostrils, tainting everything. Sleep deprivation took its toll, with dark circles under my eyes and a constant fatigue that no amount of sleep could cure. And then, when I could sleep, there are the dreams. Almost every night, those glowing red eyes would come to me as if the creature is still watching. The dreams, as unsettling as they were, began to take on a pattern over time. The creature's eyes were always the centerpiece, staring at me from different landscapes like the campsite, my home, even places I'd never been to. But instead of feeling terrified, I started feeling a strange connection, as if the creature was trying to communicate something. In an attempt to understand my experience, I dove into researching folklore and local legends, trying to find a creature that matched the description. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks as I scoured books and online forums, drawn into a world of myths and mysteries. After considerable research, I started forming theories about the creature. Was it a guardian of the wilderness, disturbed by my presence in its territory? Or was it a solitary beast, simply curious about the strange intruder? The possibilities seemed endless, as did my growing obsession to uncover the truth. While I am yet to find concrete answers, my search continues. Each dream, each clue takes me a step closer to understanding the creature that turned my life upside down. I can't explain what I saw out there, Donovan, and I don't expect everyone to believe me. But that creature, whatever it was, is real, and I have a feeling I'm not the only one who's seen it. Hey Donovan, so here's the deal. I'm not the kind of guy who believes in the boogeyman or anything, but something happened a few years back that I can't shake. I figured your channel is the place to share it without people thinking I'm nuts. I used to work nights in a warehouse in a not-so-great part of Akron, Ohio. The warehouse was this massive, old building, and right behind it was a block of equally ancient apartments. The whole area had a vibe, like it had seen better days, you know. One night, I'm on my lunch break, and it's a real nice night, so I head out back to catch some fresh air. I'm just scrolling through my phone when I hear this weird scuffling sound. I look up, and there's this shadowy figure moving around behind the apartment building. Now, I've seen raccoons and stuff back there before, but this was different. It was bigger and moved weird, like jerky and kind of hunched over. My first thought was maybe it's some druggie, so I yell out, "Hey, you alright?" This thing stops dead in its tracks, and I swear my heart almost stopped too. It turns around and isn't human. It's like this tall, lanky thing, covered in what looks like fur or rags. I couldn't tell. But its eyes, man, they were this glowing yellow, and it had these long, bony fingers. When it turned to face me, I got a better look at it. This thing was tall. I'm talking like 7 feet, but it was really skinny, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. Its skin looked kind of grayish, and it was covered in patches of this mangy dark fur. But the face, man, that's what got me. It had this long snout, kind of like a dog, but the mouth was all wrong. It was too wide, and it had these jagged, sharp teeth sticking out. And the smell that came from it was like rotten meat and wet dog. It was so strong I could taste it. The eyes were the worst part. They were this glowing yellow, but not like a regular animal in the headlights. They were almost like they were lit up from inside, and they were intelligent. I know that sounds crazy, but it was like it was sizing me up, thinking things through. The hands, or I guess you could call them claws, were long and bony with these wicked-looking talons at the end. It held them out in front of it, kind of like how a praying mantis does. When it screeched, I saw that its throat had these weird ridges, and it moved like there was something wriggling under the skin. The sound was so loud and piercing that I felt it vibrating through my whole body. I'm frozen, and we're just staring at each other. Then this thing lets out this god-awful screech. I'm talking like a banshee wail mixed with nails on a chalkboard. I don't know how my legs move, but next thing I know, I'm back inside the warehouse, slamming the door behind me. I tell my buddy, Mike, who's working with me, and he's like, "You saw it too." Turns out he'd seen the same thing a few weeks back, but didn't say anything because he thought people would think he was losing it. We didn't go back outside for the rest of the night, and you can bet I requested a shift change the next day. I still think about that night a lot. I wonder what it was and where it came from. I've looked into local legends and cryptids, but I haven't found anything that really matches what I saw. After I bolted back inside the warehouse, I remember looking out through one of the small windows next to the door. I saw it turn and scramble up the side of the apartment building, like it was both crawling and climbing at the same time. It disappeared over the roof, and that was the last I saw of it. I know this sounds like something out of a horror movie, but I swear on everything that it's true. I don't know what that thing was, and part of me is glad I never found out. But another part of me can't help but be curious, you know? Anyway, that's my story. Maybe someone out there's seen something similar. Who knows what's lurking in shadows, right? Thanks for letting me share this, Donovan. It feels good to get it out there, even if I never got the answers I was looking for. As a veterinarian who spent nearly a decade working in both urban and rural settings across Montana, I've seen my fair share of animals, both common and rare, domesticated and wild. This account isn't about a run-of-the-mill critter I've encountered during my practice or weekend hikes, though. I hesitate to call it an animal because, in all my years of study and field experience, I have yet to find a rational explanation for what I saw that night. Let me set the scene for you. I was driving home late from the clinic in Great Falls, a small city surrounded by sprawling fields, hilly terrain, and dense patches of forests. It had been an unusually long day. A farming accident had resulted in several injured animals, and I was the on-call vet. I was driving a winding 2-lane road flanked by miles of open land and patches of forest that form a jagged horizon against the starlit sky. It was a clear autumn night in October of 2016, a bit chilly but not uncommon for Montana around this time of year. Driving on that empty road, the only sound I could hear was the hum of my car's engine and the occasional crackle from the AM radio. The beam from my headlights was the only source of light, creating an island of visibility in an ocean of darkness. But in that bubble of light, my normal routine drive was interrupted by something entirely out of the ordinary. Suddenly, a figure dashed across the road, causing me to slam on the brakes. My car skidded to a halt just a few feet away from the creature. My heart pounded in my chest as I squinted through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was roughly 7 feet tall, hunched over, making its actual height seem taller. It was covered in a coarse coat of dark hair, brown or perhaps black, but it was hard to tell under the stark, contrasting illumination of my headlights. It was unmistakably bipedal and bore a vaguely humanoid shape, but was bulkier, more muscular. Its arms were long, almost disproportionate, ending with what looked like claws or sharp-tipped fingers. I couldn't make out its face very well. It was turned away from the light, but I could see pointed ears sticking out from the massive hair. What struck me the most were its eyes, reflecting a chilling yellow glow, a common trait among many nocturnal animals. But these eyes held an uncanny sense of intelligence, almost human-like. It stood frozen for a moment, our gazes locked. Then, with a swift and powerful leap, it disappeared into the dense forest beyond the road. It all happened within a matter of seconds, but the image was seared into my memory. I was left sitting there, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. My rational mind was scrambling to identify the creature, to relate it to something known, something familiar but came up empty. When I finally pulled myself together, I slowly accelerated, eyes scanning the road and the surrounding area, half expecting the creature to reappear. But there was nothing except the quiet rustling of the night wind and the usual night sounds. Once I was home, I tried to make sense of what happened. I considered reporting it, but then what was I supposed to say? That I saw an unidentified creature that defied categorization. I didn't want to be ridiculed or brushed off as just another vet who'd had a long day. So I kept the experience to myself, besides sharing it with a few close friends and family members who were as baffled as I was. There were no other reported sightings of such a creature, and nothing turned up during my sporadic and rather covert inspections of the area. Over time, I was left with a gnawing uncertainty and a mystery that seemed destined to remain unsolved. That encounter challenged my view of the natural world. There was an unease, a lingering sense of fear, yes, but also curiosity. I found myself revisiting that night, replaying that sighting in my mind, wondering what it could be, where it came from, and why it crossed my path. But even years later, I still don't have any answers. Just an experience that serves as a stark reminder of the inexplicable and unknown elements that lie beyond our understanding. I've been working here in Yellowstone for about 5 years now, and I absolutely love it. The scenery is breathtaking, the wildlife incredible, and the people are generally pretty friendly. But there is one thing that I have not told anybody about my job: the occult activity that goes on in the park. I'm not sure if it's because Yellowstone is built on top of what I believe to be an active volcano, or what, but there seems to be a higher concentration of demonic activity here than anywhere else I've ever been. Trust me, I've seen some crazy stuff in my line of work. In fact, one of the more memorable experiences I had was when I was called out to investigate a disturbance near one of the thermal springs. When I got there, I found a group of people surrounding a large metal cylinder. It was roughly 6 feet tall and 3 feet in diameter and was glowing with this eerie green light. I understand this sounds like something from an X-Files episode, but it's what I have to tell you. The people around it were chanting and waving their arm around like crazy, most of them completely naked. I immediately knew that this was some kind of strange ritual. As I stepped in to try to stop it, they turned feral on me. They were screaming and cursing, trying to jump on me, bite me, and attack me. In fact, one of them almost did. Fortunately, I was able to subdue this individual fairly easily, and after calling for backup, I had assistance within minutes. There were several of us on the scene, able to handle the situation. It appeared that all of them were not in their right minds, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure what the cylinder was used for, but it was confiscated, taken in, and apparently analyzed. I was told that the military took over on that one, so I don't have any update on the cylinder, why it was glowing, or what it was used for. That's just my speculation, of course, going by what I had experienced. I can only imagine what would have happened if we had not stepped in. I remember that we had some immediate personnel changes during that investigation. Within days, some of our staff just disappeared and we had new people. We were told not to question any changes and just do our job. Now, I've seen other things too, things that I can't even begin to describe. But one thing that I do know is that Yellowstone is a hotbed for strange activity and it's only getting worse. I don't claim to know what the future holds, but I do know that we need to be vigilant. We need to be on the lookout for anything and everything that seems out of place. If we're not, who knows what might happen next. My name is Mark Thompson, and I've been working as a research assistant at a company based on the outskirts of London for the past 5 years. The facility primarily focuses on chemical research, and I've spent countless late nights working alone in the laboratory. It was on one of these nights that I had an encounter that I still struggle to comprehend. It was April 16, 2022, around 2 a.m. The lab was bathed in a dim, flickering fluorescent light that always created eerie shadows along the walls. The atmosphere was heavy with the scent of chemicals and the hum of the ventilation system. I was alone, as usual, engrossed in my work, trying to meet an approaching deadline. As the hours ticked by, my concentration began to wane. I rubbed my eyes and stretched my cramped muscles. I needed a break. So I decided to step outside into the chilly night air to clear my mind. The small courtyard adjacent to the laboratory was surrounded by a dense forest, creating an additional illusion of isolation. As I stepped outside, the cool breeze immediately sending shivers down my spine. The moon, partially hidden behind thick clouds, cast an eerie glow upon the surroundings. It was then that I noticed an unusual rustling sound emanating from the nearby bushes. My curiosity became heightened, and I walked toward the source of the noise, cautiously. As I approached the bushes, the rustling grew louder, accompanied by an occasional low growl. My heart began to race, and I could feel beads of sweat forming on my forehead. I hesitated for a moment, contemplating whether to proceed or retreat to the safety of the laboratory. My scientific curiosity eventually won over my instincts, and I pushed through the foliage. The sight that greeted my eyes was, to put it in one word, unbelievable. It was a creature that I am sure was not any known species. It stood at least 6 feet tall, with a muscular build that was covered in coarse, matted fur. Its face was elongated, resembling a cross between a wolf and a reptile. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity, the irises a piercing shade of yellow. Sharp, serrated teeth lined its snout. I watched as the creature prowled around the courtyard. It moved with an unnatural grace, its movements fluid and silent. Its limbs were long and powerful, terminating in claws that could tear through flesh effortlessly. I could feel its predatory gaze scanning the area, as if searching for something or someone. Time seemed to stand still as I remained hidden, observing the creature from the safety of the bushes. Fear rushed through me, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to flee, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from this being. After what felt like an eternity, the creature abruptly turned its head, locking its glowing eyes directly on mine. A jolt of terror shot through me, paralyzing my body. We stared at each other, our gazes locked. Its piercing yellow eyes seemed to bore into me. I knew instantly that this creature was revealing to me a depth of ancient wisdom and unspoken secrets. With a sudden swiftness, the creature turned and vanished into the darkness of the forest. The rustling of leaves and the crunching of twigs soon faded away, leaving only the night's oppressive silence in its wake. I stood there trembling, unable to process the magnitude of what I had just witnessed. Once the initial shock subsided, a whirlwind of thoughts consumed my mind. I questioned the reality of what I had seen, doubting my own senses. Should I report this encounter to my colleagues, or would they claim I was overly fatigued? The fear of being labeled insane gnawed at me, but deep down, I knew I couldn't keep this experience to myself. After gathering my scattered thoughts, I hurried back into the laboratory, my heart still pounding in my chest. With trembling hands, I wrote down every detail of the encounter in my journal, trying to capture the essence of the creature's presence. It was my attempt to preserve the authenticity of the experience, to ensure that this encounter would not fade away like a mere dream. In the following days, I confided in a trusted colleague about what I had witnessed. Although they listened with an open mind, skepticism shadowed their expression. To this day, I cannot help but wonder about the creature's true nature and purpose. Was it an undiscovered species, a genetic mutation, or something far more extraordinary? The encounter left me with more questions than answers, a lingering sense of awe, and an undeniable awareness that there are mysteries in this world that defy conventional understanding. That night changed me. It shattered the boundaries of my perception and made me acutely aware of the vast unknown that lies just beyond our grasp. It taught me humility, reminding me that the world is far more complex and extraordinary than we can ever fathom. And though the encounter left me with an unshakable sense of unease, it also ignited within me a deep curiosity to explore the boundaries of our existence, to seek answers to the enigmas that dwell in the shadows of our reality. I'm not certain about the whole skinwalker thing or where they live or what they look like, but I was told to post my story here in hopes of some answers. See, I live in the UK, and my friend's uncle owns quite a large bit of land. We go hunting there quite often. We hunt pheasant, rabbit, squirrel, and duck, so there's no need for any high-powered guns, and we usually just take air rifles. Obviously, rabbits are nocturnal, so most of the time we would set up camp and go off with flashlights up at the top of the land where there was less woodland and a higher chance of finding them. But tonight, I suggested we go down to the woodland area, as I had seen a few rabbit dens near the creek. My friend was very against going down there and made it clear he wanted to stay up in the fields. I told him, fine, I'll just go off on my own and see what I can catch. So I go down to the creek, which, by the way, is a very large dip in the ground with the stream running at the bottom. I remember that as I neared the creek, I heard splashing and kicking in the stream, which I thought might have been the rabbits. But when I looked through my scope, there was too much vegetation, and I needed to get closer. As I started to descend the very steep side down to the creek, I noticed a white glint in the corner of my eye. When I looked, I noticed that it was bone. I thought it was quite cool and wanted to get a closer look. But upon closer inspection, I could see quite clearly that it was a fully grown female deer, or what was left of it. This was strange because, as I said before, we live in the UK, and we don't have a lot of predators down south where I was. So I thought of all the things it could have been. My friend's uncle? No, he doesn't have a deer hunting license. A very large fox? No, I doubt a fox could kill a deer this size. In the end, I came to the conclusion that it had fallen down the creek and broken its leg and had been left to die. I started walking back up the side of the creek when I heard some rustling on the other side. I scoped in to take a closer look. Then whatever I was looking at sprinted away, making me jump. But this wasn't any normal sprint. This was a bipedal, two-legged charge. I could see leaves rustling behind it as it ran, and it was taller than me. This thing was huge, and I was defenseless with just a mere air rifle. But the sheer force with which this thing ran was enough to make me petrified. So I hurriedly walked back from the creek to the fields to tell my friend what had happened. I asked if it was him doing it to scare me, and he swore on his life that he had been up here the whole time. After no luck catching rabbits, we went back to the tent to get some rest, but I could not sleep thinking about what had happened or what could have happened. Just then my heart dropped. The loudest, blood-curdling scream made me jump out of my skin. My friend woke up in a fluster, asking what on earth was that. It was then silent for a few moments, and then it happened again. The scream rattled on for almost 30 seconds, and my friend suggested it was a fox, but we had heard foxes scream many times before. A fox can even sound like a woman screaming. This was not it. This was akin to a grown man's scream, but we're out here in the middle of nowhere. Nobody would be on a walk at this hour. Rest assured, we did not sleep that night.